1956 when County Judge Howard Bozeman and Mayor Jack Dance of the city of Knoxville cooperated to create the agency, thinking that if the two county and city planning commissions worked together, they would do a better job for all of the citizens of Knox County. So we've been around since 1956. We're one of just a handful of metropolitan planning commissions, which are in state law referred to as regional planning commissions. Anytime more than two or more governmental entities join together on planning, it's called a regional planning commission. We've got 36 employees in the agency. We do development review, we do comprehensive planning, we do information gathering, research, data collection, and analysis, and then Jeff's group does the transportation planning for a region that extends outside of the county boundaries and includes what's known as the Knoxville urbanized area, according to folks at the Department of Transportation and the Census Department. But we got involved in Plan East Tennessee when we heard of the competition for grants from HUD. Our staff prepared the grant application, and we're lucky enough to receive it. That started a process 18 months ago that will take us through the end of 2013, when we hope to have a regional strategy for improving the area done and completed and accepted by as many folks in the 5-county region as possible. Personally, I'm a newcomer. I've only been here 8 years. Came here from Texas, part of the reverse migration from Texas back to Tennessee. But I grew up in the Midwest as well. I've worked in a variety of planning instances, from state government to regional government, county government, and local government. And I've also worked for about half of my career in the private sector for architectural and engineering firms and in the development business as well. So I've literally been on both sides of the desk that I now occupy. And with that, if we get the presentation queued up, yeah, we have to move the podium.
When we were asked to participate in this, Kelly wanted us to just give a brief PowerPoint presentation so it's kind of have the same understanding of what Plan East Tennessee is, and where we have been with the process and where we are today, and briefly where we're hoping to be in the future. If I wasn't here this morning, my wife is out there doing a Habitat for Humanity house, so I'm not sure she's out there doing a roof, and I'm going to be inside here being comfortable. So.
Turn down the lights.
Yeah, I'm thinking this was done back here. Hey, John, are these the lights right here?
So we need to turn the lights.
Yep.
Is that close?
Scared now.
But don't lock the door. As Mark indicated, Plan East Tennessee is a regional dialogue for the 5-county area that's been identified as our standard metropolitan statistical area. It includes the Union, Anderson, Knox, Loudoun, and Blount County. It is an approach to try to identify ways that we can regionally cooperate to improve and enhance our region. So we're hoping to have, through this, as a dialogue and a conversation about continued prosperity and economic vitality of the region, a strategy that lays out priorities for action that local governments can take, This is not a plan that would, a strategy that anyone but local governments will be able to implement. And again, implementation is at the local level, with your local decision makers, your city councils, county commissioners, and dialogue with the community to implement any policies. There's been other visioning process out there. I like to relate to visioning as if you're driving down the interstate, and if you only look at that one car right in front of you, you don't see what the other cars are doing, 15 or 20 or 30 cars out in front of you, you could be in big trouble if there's an incident or whatever. So you need to be looking, and we need to be looking beyond 1 year. We're focusing on 5 areas of issues here. Economy and workforce, it seems to be, continues to be a driving issue, the major issue that is coming out of our discussions and dialogue. How will we continue to maintain economic competitiveness throughout the country? Transportation infrastructure. Just did a meeting Wednesday with the TDOT commissioner. We have the 4th best transportation system in the country, but revenues continue to fall because the way our vehicles are becoming more and more efficient. Revenues continue to fall throughout the country and statewide. How are we going to continue to maintain the investment infrastructure we have out there? Housing in neighborhoods, again, continue to have good, prosperous, and safe neighborhoods. Clean environment, good water, clean air. We are non-attainment for ozone and PM 2.5. How can we do that? How can we improve? And whether we can do that much of it locally, because a lot of air quality comes from plants in the Midwest or plants down in Birmingham, but there is a part that we need to do. And then healthy communities. Obesity and diabetes rates and that are just really extremely high in East Tennessee and throughout the South, and the ways that we can work to improve that. A number of partners, will not list here, that have asked to participate early on in this adventure. Several of them continue to participate, ranging from local governments and state governments and private nonprofits. So again, taking a regional approach, the slide on your right looks at, and it shows the number of folks that, it gives you a understanding of the commuting patterns. Union County, about 65 to 70% of the folks in Union County commute out of their county to other counties for work. They're traveling long ways to get to their jobs and their employment. There's about 12,000 that go from Knox to Anderson County. There's 9,000 that go from Anderson to Knox County, 14,000 from Blunt to Knox County. So there's, in this region, a number of people travel quite a ways for their employment. And that's good. I mean, it ties us together. It's where people live and work. That does, look at and put strain on our transportation infrastructure. Talk to that. And then again, the healthy environment, the range of jobs that we have to work with are really critical. So where we are now, we're trying to establish a shared identity and vision for the next 30 to 40 years. We started officially process in October of 2011. Done a number of 2 series of public forums and outreach efforts. Create a livability report card that looks at the data that is today and how do we compare statewide and nationally on a lot of key factors. And then we have trying to establish the regional vision of this coming time period now through the end of the year. So what we've learned is there's a lot of issues that people agree about. There's opinions about the differing role of government has and how we should lead within this region. There are regional challenges, but there are local needs. Transportation is like an example. There's local transportation issues in each county, but there's tremendous regional transportation needs. There's infrastructure needs when it comes to wideband or wireless. A lot of places in Union County do not have that. Some of our strengths, again, which most of you know, are related to activating our medical and strong employment centers, our natural beauty of mountains, rivers, and open spaces that attract millions and millions of tourists to this area. We need to continue to try to take advantage of that, maintain and protect those amenities. quality jobs are needed. We're growing in jobs, but the number of jobs seem to be going more and more in the service sector that are not paying well as those that we used to have in this region. Hotels and motels and retail jobs are growing, but they're not paying. They're not paying the $20 to $30 per hour jobs that we need to maintain a good, healthy family and a healthy community. Some of the things and issues that just have come up through our discussion is, again, what is the role of government? Is there too much government? How do we plan and look around regional issues and still let local governments continue to move forward where their desires are? So, and counties have very honestly different needs. Union County has different needs in some respects than Loudoun County. The most important regional issues that we've collected through a survey of 400 people from each of the counties, lack of good paying jobs. The University of Tennessee conducted this survey, lack of good paying jobs, pollution in our rivers and lakes, roads and highways, lack of public transportation, even that we heard out in Union and Anderson County. There are no transportation choices beyond just the automobile. And again, just some anecdotal data about our region. We heard a lot about quality education and drug use. We're not going to be able to address drug use through this process, but it continues to be a serious problem for families and a serious problem for employers. Mark, I'll just turn briefly over to you.
Finger on it. Okay, so we've spent since October listening to folks through our 2 series of community forums and meeting with groups throughout the 5-county region over that period of time. We've also collected and analyzed data, published the livability report as a summary of that data. Those 2 things we found were matching up very well, and on top of that, we worked with the University of Tennessee to do that 5-county survey of 2,000 people. We had a response of 2,400 from each county, a statistically valid survey. That survey corroborated what we had heard from listening to people and what we had seen from analyzing the data. So we feel we've got a pretty good idea on where the community is as far as the issues that have been identified and the problems that we all know that are out there. We've been looking and meeting with people, looking at data and meeting with people to identify trends and what really drives those trends and drives change in our community. We know that there are enormous demographic shifts going on. Our population is aging. The population of natives is actually shrinking. We know that we've got a desire to separate land uses and disperse development on the part of a lot of people. That results in the loss of agricultural land quite often. Our transportation options are relatively few, driven by the personal preferences for automobiles. We know that people choose to locate where there are amenities, where there are good schools. Energy costs, particularly in the last few years of gasoline, is an enormous driver of change and a factor in location decisions. We've analyzed the employment structure and know that our fastest growing employment sectors are those that pay the lowest wages and have the limited opportunities for job advancement. And we know that there's a clamoring out there for better food, activity, and lifestyle opportunities for everybody, for more choices for folks. So this all gets fed into the equation when we begin looking to the future. We know that things are going to change. There's Level Road, Cedar Bluff, 40 years ago. So we know things change. We know what's on the horizon. This region has an incredibly stable and consistent slope of population increase. And we can project that out to 2040 and see that, whoops, I gotta talk faster to keep up. We know that we need to accommodate 300,000 additional people by the year 2040 and to accommodate 240,000 new jobs. So our exercise will be to analyze the different ways to go about doing that. Part of that is to look at the trends. Planners talk about scenarios. This is our trend scenario. 1915, that's what our population looked like. The darker the area, the denser the population. You can very easily pick out the communities in each of the counties. Well, by 2010, this is what the population looks like spread across the 5 counties, and you see how it's been dispersed over those 60 years. For 2040, this is the picture that we're projecting, with 43% more residents and 54% more jobs. The big blobs are the national park and the state and national forests, Sharp Chapel area up in Union County. But you can see that this is our trend scenario. So as we begin going forward, we're going to be looking at different options from that trend and taking ideas from people, whether it's increasing amenities in the city to encourage more growth in the city, thereby preserving the rural landscape, or dispersing the population throughout the 5 counties evenly. I'm reminded that I came across an article this summer about a regional planning project that was first voiced in 1921. A young architect wrote an article in the Architect's monthly journal about a regional approach to planning. And it took something like 15 or 16 years to get that idea up and running. And as a result of that 1921 idea by one person on regional planning, we have the Appalachian Trail. So if we can get one good idea to come out of this regional planning process that can ferment for a while and people can grab onto it, take ownership of it, and get it done one way or the other. We don't care how it gets done, as long as good ideas get done. We're all going to be better off. So we've established a website, PlanETN.org. That's where all of the data and results from all of the meetings are being posted. You can see the scenarios that we'll be talking about. The trend scenario will be posted shortly. We're still working on it. And the schedule for upcoming events is always available on our website. So keep track of us there. And with that, I will turn the lights back on. I think this is the last slide. Oh, we're in there.
If we can get somebody those lights. All right, everybody, give Jeff Welsh and Mark Donaldson a hand. I want to thank everybody for their attention during that. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Don Casey and Ken Freeman to give you a little introduction to who they are. Here you go.
I appreciate all you folks turning out on a Saturday. My name is Kenneth Freeman. I live in North Alabama on a cattle ranch. Actually, all I wanted to do when I grew up was be a cowboy. I did one of those things. A little closer. I managed to become a cowboy. I'm not sure I've grown up yet. What did, too close. I probably don't even need it. But anyway, Along the way, I graduated from the University of Georgia in animal science. And I've done some master's degree work in economics. Did 3 tours of duty in Vietnam as a Navy pilot. Got a job with Southern Airways as an airline pilot. 5 mergers later, I retired as a captain in the Northwest. And just like Delta all of my life, but now that I see them on my paychecks, I'm beginning to learn to live with them too. So they bought out Northwest. Things are very volatile in the airline industry. I'm chairman of a group that we formed about 12 years ago called Alliance for Citizens' Rights. Volume okay? Okay. And we're primarily concerned with property rights issues and constitutional issues. People ask me a lot of times how I got into this. I was at a county commissioners meeting one time, and somebody in the audience spoke of something called the Wildlands Project. When it was over with, I asked him what it was all about and started looking at some maps. And Alabama was the first state in the United States to map every square inch of the state because of NASA being there. And there was a program called Virtuosity. And basically what this program had is everything that is known about any piece of property was on this program. Back then, any citizen could go on the internet and they could look at it. They've taken it down now to the point where only public officials have the codes to get on there. But anyway, I went to that site. I was looking at the Wildlands Project, and I looked up my cattle ranch. And everything within 3 miles of the Tennessee River, my ranch, my neighbors' ranches, all of my neighbors up and down that river was color-coded dark green. When I looked down into the code, it said human-free habitat. And so from that second on, I knew that if I didn't do something to fight this, that the environmental movement was going to take my property and all of my neighbors' property, and they were going to turn it into human-free habitat, whether we chose to do that or not. And so we got in the business of property rights, formed the Alliance for Citizens' Rights, and we've been working on that ever since. Like I said, I think this was back in about 2000. So we've been at it a while. We've managed to pass some legislation in Alabama that you probably heard about. The due process bill under the Constitution, it's called. And that got quite a bit of press in Europe. It got some press here in the United States. It's a heck of a note when you have to read a European paper, the London Telegram, and find out what's really going on in the U.S. But they reported more on this than the U.S. newspapers did. Started getting phone calls from a lady in Australia. She sounded Australian anyway. So we talked about it, and so one day she said, well, will you come? And I said, come where? She said, Sydney. I said, as in Sydney, Australia? She said, yes. So I said, that's a long way to go, and I'll send you all the paperwork, and we'll send you DVDs of our presentation, and save you all that money and all the hard wear and tear on this. And she said, no. We want you to come there and talk about this to the Australian Parliament and other government functionaries because we're losing control of our country. Can't hear?
No. Need your audio fix, please.
So anyway, we're going to Australia, Don and I, the first 2 weeks in September, and we're going to tour the country and talk to the Parliament and government officials about how to try to save the property rights of Australian citizens. And that's all I need to say at this point. Don?
I'll try this mic. Is it any better?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not a matter of the mic, it's the position.
The position of the mic and whether or not you're getting some sort of feedback. I hear a wisp in it. Is that it?
You're fine right now.
It's fine right now. Okay.
He was drifting in and drifting out.
You want me to start on?
Okay, is it still okay?
Yeah, you're
All
fine.
right, my name's Don Casey, and I spent 4 years in the Navy, went back to Birmingham, my hometown, spent 33 years in a steel mill, watched as society disintegrated before my eyes. I mean, my lifetime is a very short period of time. And believe me, this is as old as I am. I know that this is not the world I grew up in. If you're anywhere close to my age, you certainly recognize we have problems, serious problems. Well, along about 1992, there was, of course, a rather hot contest for the presidency, and there was 3 people running. NAFTA was a big issue at the time, and they kept telling us what NAFTA was all about, but they never quoted anything that was in the document. Now, I haven't read very much. I have no credentials whatsoever, other than just the average person. But for me to order overnight express from Washington, D.C., the 2 volumes of NAFTA, and then sit down and spend the next 3-4 months studying this to the point that I could quote it like the Bible, to say that this was an eye-opener is an understatement. So from that point then, I also knew that in 1992 there was something called the Earth Summit. It's also been called Agenda 21, and it is actually this document right here. It was signed by President Bush. It is only one of many plans of action at the local, national, and international level to institute something called sustainable development. Now, we hear a great deal about planning, and actually, as long as the government plans for their property and their assets, I'm okay with that. But when they begin to plan my future and my private property rights, then I have something I think I ought to speak to. And that's where we are, because if they plan what they intend to plan for in the future, we're going to have a lot of problems in this country that's going to make what we have already seen monumental. It's just quite unbelievable what has already been agreed to. And they talk about these plans as if you're going to have input. Well, you're going to be welcome to come in and sit at their facilitated meetings and hear what the facilitator has to say, but the outcomes are already set in stone. It's sustainable development. It is the philosophy that has been implemented in legislation across many years in this country. It didn't have a name until 1987. And so now if you read the Department of Sustainability for the city of Knoxville, they actually have a citizen's guide to sustainable development, what you as a citizen should do. Lewis County, Tennessee has all of the elected officials, and by the way, the handout in the lobby is that proclamation, and they want everyone to adopt the tenets of sustainability and inspire others to do the same. So while if you attend these meetings of the planners in the future, have questions and knowledge about sustainable development and what it means to your private property rights and your life, and begin to ask pertinent questions, because that's the problem that I have seen, is that the average person in society has no concept of what sustainable development is all about, and therefore they can't ask a question. So I'm hoping that this session this morning will reveal much information about what is planned, because taking the $4.3 million grant from the federal government has already tied the counties in this area to that specific plan, and in the notice of funds available, which is the document from the federal government, we have extrapolated some information from that. It is a handout in the lobby that goes through and tells what these people are responsible for to regulate. Now, that means that their group, their oversight is going to grow. Their bureaucracy is going to grow, and the only job opportunity is going to be with government to regulate what we can or cannot do. So with that, and then I hope that we can... The meeting this afternoon will be a presentation specifically about sustainable development with examples from here and also what has been going on elsewhere in the country. So hope you'll attend.
And that's set for... that'll be after the action. All right, now to the part where everybody gets to ask questions, where you from the public can ask questions. I want to go ahead and recognize the lady in the yellow dress back there. She has the microphone, and she'll be bringing it to you as you have questions. It's my wife, Bethany. Everybody thank her for running around and helping us today. And go ahead and give all these gentlemen a round of applause for sharing with us and introducing themselves. Now, as far as these questions go, I want to keep them to local issues. Want to make sure we're talking about issues in the region they discuss, either Knox, Anderson, Loudon, around here, and Tennessee in general. We don't want to talk about, we want to keep it local. Also, we want to make sure that we ask respectful questions. We want to keep this as civil as possible. So, with that, let's go ahead and begin. Who has the first question? Go ahead and get Bethany to come down. Gentleman up front. Go ahead, sir.
A question to the gentleman on my left. The data you showed, the ratings for the 2.1 or whatever, what was that compared to? I mean, how big a region was that data gathered from? So how do we know? So we see on your scale that, okay, X, Y, and Z is bad, worse, worser. But what was that compared? Is it something national or what?
Do you all want to clarify the statistic that he's
Yeah, there was a slide that showed an array of issues, and there was a numerical value associated with each of those. That was from the community survey, which was a response of 2,000 people in the 5-county region, 400 from each of the counties, and it simply is a ranking relative to each other as far as ranking, a rank order of those issues compared to each other. It's not a comparison to any statewide number or anything else.
okay? Next question. Saw her go up first.
Good morning. When your property is involved in an area like this cattle rancher's property where you're shown as a green zone, as a property owner, would that mean that you're going to change the zoning of my property? Therefore, by the way, in real estate, one of the most dramatic and destabilizing things that can happen in a community is a zoning change. How is it that if I'm shown on your chart as in a green area, you are going to impact my ownership of my property? You're going to switch the zoning on me? You're going to raise my taxes? How are you going to chase me out of my property? And what compensation are you putting in place to do that, if any? Do you understand my question?
I guess to clarify, are there going to be green zones, and would there be an effort to take property that will be in said zones, and how would people be compensated?
I'm not familiar with the Alabama plan and what the text showed as a description of that area, but with regard to zoning, only the legislative body of that local jurisdiction has the authority to change the zoning. And there is a due process for that.
Only a legislative body in a local jurisdiction can change zoning. And there are required public hearings. For example, the City of Knoxville City Council is the final authority on all zoning within the City of Knoxville. Knox County Commission is the final authority on all zoning outside of Farragut and Knoxville. Only they can change the zoning map.
I understand that part. What I'm concerned is that when the government coughed up $4.3 million, that meant Knox County and Loudoun County and Blount County were agreeing to certain things. And one of those things, in my eyes, is you're going to need to develop your city like this or your county like this. So I think the pressure would be to them to live to the agreement of following what the plan is. So you may say, yeah, it's up to them to rubber stamp it, but they may be compelled to do that by having received this money.
Well, state law says that in order to have a zoning code and a zoning map for a jurisdiction, there has to be a comprehensive land use plan in place. So all of our counties except Union have zoning and have a comprehensive plan in place. The legislative body would have to adopt a new plan, new comprehensive plan, to replace what they have if they're going to change that. Otherwise, all zoning is done in accordance with, has to be consistent with that comprehensive plan. And it is not a requirement that all of the jurisdictions in the 5 counties adopt whatever we produce as a new comprehensive plan.
We want to spread it around, get some other people involved. Yeah, go ahead.
Is this one working now? Is this the same bad? All right, I just wanted to add a little bit. Can everybody hear me now? I don't normally use mics. I don't need to. what this lady's talking about, real estate here, let me just tell you what has happened in other situations. I know you won't talk local, but it's all local. In our area there, I had some friends that about my age, and they bought some land on top of a mountain. They determined how fast the city was going to grow, and they bought some land on top of a mountain as an investment property. Now, for 45 years, they paid the taxes on that property, they made payments, and they used that as their retirement. And then one day, the Planning Commission comes out and they designate that as a no-bill zone. The day that they did that, these people basically lost 45 years of work. They lost their retirement. They lost their ability to give anything to their children at the stroke of a pen. So this is very dangerous. This is very dangerous power when, you know, these people, when they started this process, there were no restrictions on their property. They invested 45 years of hard work and money, and then it was taken away from them by some planner. And then when they went to the county commission and tried to get something done about it, they said, we don't have control. The planning commission has control. They're an independent body. They had no recourse other than go through the court and try to sue, which when you do that, you're fighting your own tax dollars. They've got tax money to go to court. You're having to do it with your private money. So the change of zoning, as she's speaking of, is a very dangerous thing, and it is something that you really need to look at. Like my ranch, if it's color-coded green, sooner or later, they're coming after it. And that's all the comment I wanted on that.
Yep. Clear. There we go. Just for clarification, you did say, and I'm trying to relate this all back to our area here. You did say that every municipality over 50,000 across the country does have a metropolitan planning commission. Did you say that in your intro?
At that, I was talking about regional transportation planning organizations, but cities, very small size, have planning and zoning commissions of all sizes.
All right.
Yeah, let me jump in on that question, because zoning is just one label for land use control, and you need to broaden out your aspects. There's other things such as zoning overlays. And a zoning overlay, as these guys would be well aware, would be used to declare open space. Open space is part of this listing in the Notice of Funds Availability. They well know that there will be a designation for open space. Now, there are other things already on the books that will regulate land use in this area. The Flood Damage Prevention Ordinance says up front that any regulation created by FEMA in the future is already made part and parcel of your local regulation. They are also aware of that. Go up, if you're taking notes, go out and look up the Southeastern Ecological Framework. It is the mapping of the 7 southeastern states and where these green open spaces is going to be applied. How that is going to be brought about either through conservation easements, through many vehicles, legal vehicles that is, will entirely be up to the local commission and how they'll bring this about. But that is all, the maps are already there. It's just a question of getting the zoning people who have the money at hand to bring about the bureaucracy to enforce these regulations, whatever they're called, whether it's zoning regulations or flood damage prevention ordinance, against the property owner.
I've got 2 questions. If the Metropolitan Planning Commission, and I'd like all opinions on this, left and right. If the Metropolitan Planning Commission and other planning agencies are applying for federal money in the tunes of millions of dollars, it seems to me to be a conflict of interest between what the Fed wants and their plan to take down this country into a socialized state and what the people want. It seems to me to be a conflict of interest. Can you answer that? And I've got a follow-up question to that as well.
Well, I believe that was addressed to y'all and probably to...
I guess the grant application that we applied for was just working out there.
Yes.
is a land use. It's a regional dialogue to look at how are we going to grow from a regional perspective. It's not a social agenda from my perspective. And the federal government provided dollars, Congress provided dollars for regions to compete, to develop regional plans or to implement regional plans to improve their, look at sustainable practices. So I don't, I'm not going to comment on social government or nature, but that's what we're here for, and that's the activities surrounding the planning student test.
It seems to me, though, that when you take millions of dollars, you're not going to get it without strings attached. If you guys are supposed to be working for the people in the communities you are planning around, then it seems to me that taking money from a federal organization, you're not actually working for the people, you're working for what the federal corporation wants you to do.
The money is public money. It's not federal money, it's public money. So we're dealing with public policies.
We'll move on to the next question. Any comments over here?
Let me say one thing. Sustainable development is social, economic, and environmental. These people have agreed to accept the federal money. They're going to look at all three of those aspects. They're going to do data collection on households related to all three aspects of sustainable development.
Since we're up here already, we'll go ahead and we'll start moving towards the back. I promise. We still got over an hour. Okay, so we'll get to as many people as we can. Go ahead.
First of all, this thing on? I'd like to welcome all our guests, given the temporary Big Orange Bar mitzvahs today, the Alabama guys. Would all of the elected officials who are here please stand up and say New York? Because I saw some well-known officials slip in here, and that they're present here, so we know there's important people here. I see Miss Massey hiding over there.
Give a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen.
I see the newly elected executive of Anderson County hiding right there. Stand up, Miss Freeman. There are the rest of our locals. Anybody else elected officials like? I see Steve Hall. Dr. Richard Briggs.
John Reagan, Representative of Anderson County.
Thank you, folks. A couple of questions, if I could, please.
Ms. Vaughn back here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right there.
Sally.
Ann Garcia Garland, Oak Ridge City Council.
I'd like to, we obviously have some very different views about this process of planning and zoning, and we know it's important for a civilized community to have things to agree and negotiate these issues. A couple of points, if I could. The data slides you showed with the people making these choices, rank order choices, in these 5 meetings, these 2,000 people. 400 people attended each meeting. Did you supply the data that was in ranking? Did individuals supply that data, those choices in those rank orders?
That particular slide showed the results of a survey of random individuals from around the region. They weren't generated from a meeting. They were generated from a telephone survey. The survey had a list of issues identified, and the folks rank ordered them, and that slide showed the summary of those orderings.
To answer the question, and you provided these suggestions to people over the phone, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you have this group. Now, it may be quite reliable, county to county. Doesn't mean it's valid, though, does it?
The response produced a statistically valid survey response for each of the 5 counties individually and as a whole, with a plus or minus 3 to 4%.
But only of that sample, correct?
No, the whole role of samples is to produce a statistically valid sample.
Were other choices taken that didn't correspond to other people that didn't respond to the list, but there also that didn't show up in those numbers? Just curious. suggested items, and then we took, maybe only called one, didn't call more than 400. Just curious on the day.
Yeah, they called many more than 400, but they had responses from 400.
That was from that forced choice list.
From a list of issues that had been identified through the community forums, through our meetings with small groups.
Last question. Nine counties one vision was really the birth mother of PlanET. The rump committees of 9 counties were what really became PlanET. Is that right?
I would say that's not a correct statement.
That's what Joe Holcroft said.
I don't speak for Joe Holcroft.
Who else do you think it was the rump committees of 9 counties one vision?
No.
It was not. They didn't exist in 9 counties one vision. They come forward later.
Correct. They did not.
That lady keeps getting the hand up there real high. Go ahead, ma'am. All right, just to clarify, for these wireless mics, okay, there's only one channel for both of these. So when mine is on, the other work, and vice versa. So after you ask a question, if one of the gentlemen up here have the wireless mic, make sure you turn your mic off. Okay? Thank you.
Okay. I just want a clarification and try to bring this back real local, if we can. I think that Mr. Donaldson said, or one of y'all said in the presentation, that these plans were a regional overview that would be implemented and controlled locally. They said by city councils and county commissions. Did I understand that correctly? Nodding heads. Okay.
You're getting a yes.
Okay. So the question is, right now, if there is a request for variance, you can take, if a property owner, a landowner, or a developer has a request for variance, they take that to county commission and it's voted on. If they don't like that answer, they can go to court and file an appeal. Are you saying that that process is going to still be here? In other words, if there's a regional plan and a property owner doesn't like what's happening, what recourse does that property owner have, if any, under a regional plan?
What the lady was talking about was a variance from a zoning regulation, I believe.
Or subdivision, or any type of variance.
Well, okay. Subdivision regulations are the authority of the local planning commission, whereas the zoning ordinance is the authority of the local legislative body. Most legislative bodies have set up what they call a Board of Zoning Appeals or adjustments, which handle variances. But it is a function of the zoning ordinance, which can be enacted only by the local legislative body. The subdivision regulations are enacted by the local planning commission. Nothing that could be done, we don't have a regional form of government, so all changes to subdivision regulations or zoning regulations have to be done by either the local planning commission or the local legislative body. And I don't see that changing in the foreseeable future.
So is there an appeals process for a subdivision regulation currently? I'm a little confused.
Yes, in Knox County, the Metropolitan Planning Commission is the authority that's charged with approving plats. And people have the right to ask for variances from those regulations. If they want to appeal those decisions, they can be taken to the local court of appropriate jurisdiction, which is typically chancery court.
I have a couple of comments. First, I think we should be realistic here and state the fact that PlanET is part of Agenda 21. Next, you mentioned grant money, and everyone's all excited every time we get grant money. That's our taxpayer money that you're using against the people to try to take our property rights away. You talk about 5 region here. Union County Mayor had enough sense to say we don't want to be a part of PlanET anymore. You mentioned that you had all these group meetings for people, and yet we were not allowed to ask questions as a group. We had to break up in little bitty circles and have people who were planners sitting at those tables trying to control the output of what the people had to say. We wanted to speak in front of a group and let everyone hear our questions and your answers. I thank you for being here today to answer those questions, but it should have been done at every one of those meetings. And lastly, you mentioned just now in your presentation that there have been ideas in the past that have been brought up, and then finally, through the years, things have happened, and that these ideas should be brought forth, and you didn't care if it was a good idea, how it was accomplished. In other words, you don't care if people's property rights are taken away or their stamp.
Is there a question?
Yes, I'd like to know. Well, in fact, he's going to answer it for me.
But go ahead and address it as a question. If you
Okay, then your statement was you didn't care how those things got accomplished. What if it affects people's property? Do you care then?
Okay.
The comment was that I don't care if it's a group of community leaders that gets together to decide to do something to address an issue, or a local legislative body that decides to address an issue, or a chamber of commerce that gets together to decide an issue, or this group gets together to decide an issue. I don't care where those actions come from, as long as the issues get addressed and people move together.
First, let me say one thing. We want to keep you had your question. I'm going to try to get to as many people as possible. And as we go through this discourse, ladies and gentlemen, let's make sure I know we're very excited and we're glad they're here to answer questions, but let's make sure we ask questions. It's very important. If we make statements and whatever, that's not going to get anything done here. So let's make sure we ask questions, and we're going to limit it to one question a person. I apologize for that. Let's go ahead and get to the next question. Oh, we'll let them comment now.
Yeah, I want clarification here. I have a document that somebody handed me, planning regulations 133402. And quoting, it says, exercising the powers granted to it by 133402, the Regulation Planning Commission, the Regional Planning Commission, shall adopt regulations governing the subdivision of land within its jurisdiction. And if I heard the gentleman, I was sitting down, I don't know which one, but if I heard him correctly, they said that the County Commission establishes zoning laws, but the Planning Commission controls the land use in those areas. And so what I'm asking is there no oversight by a public official? Can the County Commission not overrule the Planning Commission's decision, or do you have the final authority as to what can be done as far as subdivision rules go?
You're mixing apples and oranges there. What I said was that the legislative body has the authority with regard to the zoning ordinance, and the Planning Commission has the authority with regard to the subdivision regulations, which is the code that you quoted. The subdivision regulations create a process for creating maps of land division, not land use. They also create standards for public improvements that are required in order to support those land divisions. But the subdivisions regulations are there to create an orderly map for that jurisdiction and do not control land use. That's the zoning ordinance.
Let's keep moving towards the back because we've done a lot up here. We'll come back up front, okay? Let's hit either the gentleman in blue or the gentleman in red back there. We'll get to both of you guys, and then we'll make our way back up front, okay? Still got another 55 minutes.
Good morning. Mark, we have a vote Monday night on the Hillside and Ridgetop. The Briggs Amendment said that that was advisory only and non-binding. Now we're coming in on the minimum subdivision regulations to take part of the Hillside and Ridgetop and codify it. Can you explain how subdivision regulations relate to zoning? There are two votes on Monday night. If you get the vote, well, first thing, there is no vote for the subdivision regulations. You already have that. If you didn't get the vote on the zoning, what happens? Which takes precedence? Subdivision regulations or zoning?
The two items that the gentleman referred to on Monday's County Commission agenda relate to a piece of geography called the Hillside and Ridgetop Protection Area. One of them is the Planning Commission asking the legislative body, the County Commission, to adopt the regulations that the Planning Commission has already adopted. And it turns out that we may not have to have that vote because there is no, as of Friday afternoon, we hadn't found a record of the County Commission ever adopting the subdivision regulations, which is proper. They shouldn't have. But let me talk about those regulations a little bit. What we've done is create an alternative set of standards for development within the Hillside and Ridgetop Protection Area, which relaxes or reduces the minimum requirement that are stated now in the subdivision regulations. For example, there's a minimum 50-foot right-of-way dedication required for local roads. What we have adopted at the Planning Commission is that that can be reduced to 40 feet if the property is within the Hillside and Ridgetop Protection Area. It also said the road pavement width can be reduced from 26 feet to 20 feet. That the requirement for curb and gutter that is standard can be eliminated within the Hillside and Ridgetop Protection Area. That the big 250 minimum radius on streets can be reduced within the Hillside and Ridgetop area. So we feel that we have created an alternative set of standards that may be used, which reduce the impact on the environment and save developers money. That is the intent of the subdivision regulation requirements. On the zoning side, we asked that within the Hillside and Ridgetop Protection Area, that the minimum front yard that's now required be able to be reduced to lessen that requirement within the Hillside and Ridgetop Protection Area.
Yes, everybody gets one question and if necessary, one follow-up.
Let me re-specify this to get a little more clarity, because I didn't get the answer I was looking for. If commission votes down the zoning, what happens then? Because the entire purpose of this is the Briggs Amendment was to protect due process. We have a concern that with the minimum subdivision regulations, you can bring in the Hillside Ridgetop plan, even though you were told not to. And our concern is, we want to know what the appeal process is. With minimum subdivision regulations, there is no appeal process to commission. There's no appeal process to commission. Is there an appeal process to court? Our question is due process.
In the event that the County Commission does not act on the recommendation of the Planning Commission with regard to the amendment to the planned residential zone district requirements to reduce the front yard requirement, that's the zoning amendment. A developer who wants to do that would have to ask for a variance. And should he want that and the variance be denied, his appeal process then would be to the courts. But the amendment is simply to reduce the minimum front yard requirement in the planned residential zone district if it's within the Hillside and Ridgetop Protection Area.
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
I'll start from the beginning. With regard to zoning, the Planning Commission makes recommendations to the legislative body. The Planning Commission has recommended to the legislative body that they amend the requirements within the planned residential zone district to allow the reduction of the front yard requirement from 35 feet to whatever the developer wants, if that property is within the hillside and ridgetop protection area. So it is a reduction in the regulations. If the legislative body approves it, then that gives the authority to the Planning Commission to reduce that front yard requirement at the request of the developer. If they do not approve it, the developer can still ask for a variance. That request would be to the BZA. If the BZA denies that request, the appeal would be to the courts.
Which has precedence? Minimum subdivision regulations, etc.
They work together. The subdivision regulations create the plat, the map of the property, and establish the minimum requirements for public improvements. The zoning decides what that land can be used for. And setbacks and heights and other things like that. They work together.
I'll study more. I don't understand still.
Well,
But thank you for trying.
come and see me Monday.
Let's go ahead and move on to the next question. I believe the gentleman right in front of him. We'll go ahead and after him, we'll be making our way back to towards the front again, okay?
Thank you guys for being here. When I first heard about Agenda 21, I was very skeptical. Sounded like a conspiracy. Like most of the people in this room, I think, I put a lot of research into it, had a lot of meetings, and learned about it. Attending my first PlanET community forum confirmed it for me, so I can thank you for that. My question is this. We've been a thorn in your side of this issue. I'd like to know if you know about Agenda 21, if you put any time into looking into it, and maybe you could put us all at ease and tell us why PlanET is not Agenda 21.
I did say I wanted to keep this to local issues, and I know that y'all consider that a local issue, but I'm going to make answering that question optional. You want to answer that? To ask them to do that, I think would be a little unfair. But
Really?
Where is planning? Over here. It's not over here.
I'm just giving you the option, they chose to take it. Let's listen to the answer.
I mean, straight out.
I thought this was for the people.
I guess, do you want to hear the answer?
Yes, sir.
From my perspective and from everyone that has been involved with the application process to where we are today, this has nothing to do with Agenda 21 of the United Nations.
Really?
If you want to,
Really?
people can disagree. We are talking about our land in East Tennessee, property that I live on, property that you live on, and we're talking about regional issues that we can continue to improve upon the livability of our area. Similarities, terminology exist throughout the country and the world in various issues. And that's, I will not deny that at all, but we are not tracking, we are not affiliated with, in any sense of the imagination, with the United Nations Agenda 21. But that is
Yeah, let me get into that just a little bit. J. Gary Lawrence, I'm sure some of you have read what he had to say a number of years ago. He was a planner for the city of Seattle, and he made a speech, I think, along about 2000 in Ireland, which is recorded. You can go out and look it up. And he said that in this country, they did a survey, and I actually talked to the head of ICLE, the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. They are listed on page 55 of the document I have in front of me as being responsible for helping local communities across the globe enact the tenets of sustainable development, which Agenda 21 is part of. Now, in this speech that Mr. Lawrence gave, he said this survey that they conducted determined that the people in this country would not appreciate any affiliation whatsoever with the United Nations, Agenda 21, and or sustainable development. So they call their plans comprehensive planning, local land use, new urbanism. He goes through a long list in this particular paragraph about what this is all about. Now, let me say that one of the handouts in the front lobby goes into quotes from the Federal Register. Now, I don't know how you can get any more documented than that talks about Agenda 21, Sustainable Development, the Earth Summit, Smart Growth, and then above that is a quote from your Knoxville plan. Now, I'm quite certain that if you don't read the documentation, you can honestly say that this has absolutely nothing to do with any of the smart growth or sustainable development. But if you read the documentation, I think you're hard-pressed to say that the plan of action at the local level is not part and parcel of this. And let me go on to say that during the 90s, if you typed into any search engine on the internet, LA 21, you would invariably wind up with hits anywhere in the English-speaking countries of this globe, meaning local Agenda 21 had taken place and was being implemented in the 90s. But you did not find that application or that connection in the United States, and it was only into this century that we actually had those connections that we could firmly point to. Now, it's unfortunate that these gentlemen don't like to make that connection. I was in Dothan not too long ago. Their planner finally printed and published it to anybody that wanted to read it, that he had been enacting sustainable development in all of the tenants for his entire 18 years as a planner. And this was an open meeting where the principal of the agent is the elected officials. After all, these are merely agents of your elected officials. So I said to this planner in this meeting, I says, you're to be commended. You're the up front guy. You've got backbone. You're actually saying what you're doing and you're proud of it. But the local elected officials want to shy from implementing socialism at the local level. And they took they did kind of get hot at me about that. But if you really want to know what's going on, make written questions to your elected officials who are their principals and find out the actual connections. Get them in paper on writing stating that this is or it is not part of this program, and then go forward with your inquiry.
So a satisfactory answer for the crowd on that issue. And let's move on as we come back forward. Gentleman up here in the center table.
Hello, Mark, Jeff. You remember the second set of forms? You remember me? On the website, the PlanET's website says that 226 people participated, a total of 226 people participated in the 6 forums, which were the second set of forums. But I will tell you that in the Union County forum, there were 18 people participated according to you all, but I videotaped only 7 people responding to the questions. So I'm going to ask you, Jeff, you did a forum out in Oak Ridge here recently. Do you remember doing a forum out there? Were all of those folks at that elected officials or members of departments of the government?
They were invited by the city of Oak Ridge. I think they were elected and appointed officials from their various committees that the city of Oak Ridge has, like recreation commissions, their board of zoning appeals, and that sort of diversity of groups.
Okay. Was this the same type of forum that we did, that you did the 6 forums?
This was what we call a meeting in a box, but the same questions were asked at these forums, these smaller meetings, as they were at the larger forums.
And so was the information taken from that and included in?
Yes.
Okay.
Like I've said already, I'm trying to get to as many people as possible. We get to a point where nobody has asked a question, or where there aren't people who are new who want to ask questions. We can go back to people who have already asked questions, okay? We'll get the gentleman right next to him, and we'll just move this way, since that seems where all the questions are.
Yeah, can we move back to the ridge top and hillside for a minute, since that's my pet peeve? Mark laughs. In your mission statement originally, it stated that your intent was to protect the safety and the health of Knox County residents. And my understanding is that the reason it was stated like that is that there's a state law that requires zoning of this type to have those two criteria at the basis of it. Now, if I understand the regulations as they exist now, you're relying on I think it's 25% or more. You have to have 2 acres or more property, and only 15% of that can be cleared for the use or for the house and for the road, so on and so forth. That gives you about 13,000 square feet. If you take the 13,000 square feet and take out the amount for the road or the driveway, whichever you want to state it and everything, it leaves you roughly 10,000 square feet to put a house on. Now the average house in Knox County is about 1,600 square feet. If you take 40 by 40 and put it dead center on a 100 by 100 lot, 10,000 square feet, that gives you about 32 and a half feet on from any side of that house to the forest. Now we know from past history in this area what happens when you add storms, water, high wind, large trees in close proximity to houses. We had a whole series of trees falling on houses. Now it would seem to me that rather than protecting our safety by putting forth these types of criteria as far as how much you can clear, that you're actually putting people in danger. I went and looked at a house yesterday that was for sale that a tree had fallen on, right through the center of the house. Luckily, nobody was killed in it. But we have had people killed here. And if your responsibility, a part of your responsibility is to look at the health and safety of Knox County, I think you've done just the opposite by trying to enforce these regulations. It's a statement, you can reply if you like.
Mr. Harris is mixing apples and oranges once again. The Hillside and Ridgetop Protection Plan has been adopted, but not codified. There are no regulations. Other than the regulations that we have adopted, reducing the requirements for road improvements. But to take his example, he's trying to apply a tree clearing standard for a 2-acre parcel to a 10,000 square foot parcel. It's not the same thing. I mean, you know that. The Hillside and Ridgetop Protection Plan also has one entire section devoted to fire-wise strategies about clearing around houses to prevent forest fires and at the same time preventing large trees from falling on houses. So if you read the top plan in its entirety and read it thoroughly, you'll understand that it works together to protect the health and safety of people.
I read the whole plan, Mark. It does.
Go ahead and go to the lady at the table on the right.
My name is Trina Vaughn. I live in Oak Ridge, and I participated in your Oak Ridge meeting and the meeting in the box. And I just would like to address your statement earlier in answer to his question. Yes, that meeting was limited to people who were elected to various boards and commissions within the city. It was convenient, I thought, that most of the independent thinkers in that room were dispersed among the groups. So the end result was not a reflection of what I would suggest is probably some of the thoughts that have been expressed here. A lot of the focus today has been on the long-term impact of PlanET, but I would like a better understanding of the immediate cost. We understand $4.3 million is what started all of this. But were you all already being paid by taxpayers for your job, number one, before PlanET ever came along? And number two, how many government employees are facilitating these meetings after hours, and what kind of impact on the payroll are they having? In other words, how much money are we as taxpayers spending for this initiative above and beyond that 4.3 million?
I am a government employee and was, paid prior to this grant application. My salary is not coming out of PlanET funding that is coming to East Tennessee. The time that folks put in, that I understand, at least from the Metropolitan Planning Commission's standpoint, our night meetings and that, we are not paid for those meetings going out to that. We do not get overtime pay when we go out to meetings. Some of us may take time off to compensate or come in late mornings and then work late in the evenings, but we are not paid to attend those meetings at all. What other local governments may do as far as their participation in PlanET, I am not sure or aware of. So yes, there is additional cost that is being put into PlanET over and above the $4.3 million from MPC's staff time and other cities and counties participating in that. And I do not have a figure of that, but we would probably guess with leverage resources that from the University of Tennessee and what other cities and that have said that they will commit to it as far as in time, it'll be somewhere in the range of a total of about $6 million.
Just to clarify, is that $6 million in addition to the 4.2 million?
The total.
Total. And did you just suggest that government employees are working off the clock for free?
Sorry?
Did you suggest that government employees might be working off the clock for free at these meetings in the evenings?
I'm suggesting that I put in more than my 40 hours per week that I get paid for, that I put in 50 or 60 hours a week out there attending a lot of meetings, and I do not get paid for 50 or 60 hours of work.
Are you considered management level exempt?
Pardon me?
Are you
Most of
considered?
our employees are exempt from
So you're
working
required
overtime.
to work whatever hours it takes to get the job
Required.
done. But the lower level, didn't mean to say low, lower level employees that were facilitating this meeting, which I think I counted at least 4 or 5, I'd be surprised to find out that they donated their time. Do you think they donated their time?
From the City of Oak Ridge, you'll have to ask the City of Oak Ridge staff on that. Most of the folks from MPC are providing their time, and they may get comp time off if they're from various type of management or non-management type level.
Thank you.
All right, we're still trying to get to everybody. I'm going to get this here over here, and we'll move back to the back. Just had someone come up here and try to say, once you call on this person, I'm going to try to get to everybody. I'm not excluding anybody, not singling anybody out, so we're going to try to get to as many people as possible, okay? We'll just keep moving. We'll go to this gentleman right here.
I was a senior transportation planner, senior environmental planner, project manager in the state of California. I did that 17 years. One of the things that I've seen happen is if the federal government gives you money, they expect to have a hand in what happens to the plan. I know that this plan will have to go up to HUD since they gave you the money for a review, and any changes that they want to make prior to that, I've seen it happen in California. Then once they determine this is what's going to happen, they have the opportunity to demand that it be put in place as it is, and if you don't, they end up fining the county or the city as things happen. What can they do with your plan? Do you have to submit that plan to HUD prior to publishing what you create?
And obviously, the follow-up on that is there any recourse if the plan is not followed, right?
Our plan is, will be reviewed throughout the process by HUD, since they are the granting agency. Understanding they are not going to be saying that this is a plan or not a true plan. What they will be looking at is our grant application, say, did you meet the intent of your grant application, and were you able to address those issues? As your background in transportation with the state of California, there are, with acceptance of any federal or state dollar, you have to meet certain minimum requirements. Just as you building a highway, federal money, there are minimum requirements you have to meet. Our guidance with the Fed is we would like you to be able to address these following issues based on our grant application. They are, as we understand it, will not be approving this plan. They will not be asking or telling us to implement this plan.
Will they have opportunity to make changes to the plan and direct you to accept their changes?
Based on the discussions that we have had with them throughout, no. I don't believe so, Mark, if you disagree or not.
They were involved in reviewing our plan of action, which established our process. They're very adamant that we create an open process, and they have established that we take a comprehensive look within this plan, and that is why we have the 5 focus areas that have been created around transportation, housing, economy, environment, and health. And we talk regularly on the phone with them as far as them reminding us to stay on track, to meet the commitments that we pledged to meet in our contract and in our application, and to address those issues that we said we would address.
Yeah, let me just comment quickly on that. Obviously, he finally got around to answering the questions that there's going to be a review of whatever they do. I fully anticipate that there may not be a need for that, because if they're all on board with sustainable development and a working relationship between the federal government and this agency, then in fact they would know exactly what is being done. This is the Livable Communities Act is a partnership, calls for a partnership between HUD. It's not just HUD now, it's the Department of Transportation and EPA. All of those agencies have to look in on what is being done and approve it in order for the $4.3 million to continue to be delivered to these agencies. So now, when I talk about the notice of funds available, I quoted on this particular document that's out in the lobby, the 2010. The 2011 notice of funds available is 20 to 30 pages longer. So obviously, with more words come more regulations and more this and that. So every time the government speaks and they hand out $1, the next year it might be 50 cents and more regulations. So count on it. We're going to comply with everything that those 3 agencies have in mind for your local area.
All right, I'm going to get one more question up here, and then we're going to go start in the back again and work our way forward. Okay, Robert? Okay. Come on up here, the lady in the green sweater here.
Hi there. I'm fairly new to this PlanET information. I've done a little bit of reading on Agenda21. I am not a native. I don't think I ever will be, because I wasn't born in the good state of Tennessee. But I've been here for 16 years. I'm a property owner, and I'm very concerned, as I know everyone else is. I've been here to listen, and what I'm hearing is a lot of anti-planning for the future. My question to the gentleman on the right from Alabama, good state by the way, what is the alternative to long-range planning if the truth is there in the slide presentation that in 2040 the population in this area is going to be huge? Before you answer that, sir, my follow-on question is it the opinion of this group that we don't need any regulation, any planning, and we don't ever want to take grant money from anybody?
I don't want their dirty money. They can keep their dirty money.
Sir.
Let's not do that, please. And let's go ahead and try to, I know she did address the crowd, which I don't recommend.
I'm sorry.
Okay, but let's try to give the people, I see some people making, and I've been hearing this whole time, but when people are asking questions, please don't turn to your neighbor and make comments, especially snide ones or disrespectful ones. That is not what we're here for, okay? So if you're finished, I'm going to go ahead and give the floor to these gentlemen.
Okay, the question as I understand it is, do we need planning? How did this country come into existence without planners? And if you want to look for the country that has done the most planning, look to Soviet Russia. They have planning every 5 years with incremental updates, and their environmental trackability is not very good. Now, our federal government has adopted officially sustainable development as a tenet. Go and look and understand what sustainable development means to private property rights. And understand that when you accept that money from the federal government, it requires regulations to be written by whatever planning agency might come into play that will restrict your private property rights. Now, it is my contention that a fine example of cities that have not had planning, I think it's Austin. I don't think they have planning to date, but at least 10 or 15 years ago, they had no planning whatsoever. How is it that we as a society grew up? How did we get along without planning? So, but my point being is that the road that has been mapped out for this is already set in stone. All you have to do is read the documentation and begin to understand, for instance, Habitat 1. I know a lot of people have looked at Habitat 1. That was a United Nations conference held back in 1976. Quoting one paragraph from that, it says that the free enterprise system dealing with property rights is inefficient and has to be done away with. And that making one dime off of the sale or anything associated with your property rights is an act of social injustice. So if you begin to think about what these regulations are going to do to society and have already done, for instance, there was one man, I think in Oregon, that just spent 30 days in jail because he collected rainwater on his own property. There's many, many examples, and this is from the International Code Council. The key word is international. And your local community has already adopted the tenets of this particular international organization. They update every 3 years. So if your house is in compliance this cycle, and they write, which they will do in the next 3 years, write new regulations, and you're in non-conforming status, you know what that means when you go to sell your house. You have to bring it up to the standards. This will destroy the second-hand housing market. I mean, the planning that's set out for us is already readable. All we have to do is read it. I hope that answers your question.
Well, since the lady addressed that to both of us, I'd like to do a little bit of a summary on it. Our founding fathers wrote the Constitution with negative rights. I know that to social planners, that's not what they like to hear. They like to hear positive rights, what the government says they can do for you. But this country was founded on unalienable, and Thomas Jefferson knew exactly what he was doing when he used that term. You hear it said inalienable, unalienable, but he actually wrote unalienable, meaning that what was given to man by God, no other man could put a lien upon. Our Constitution talks about individual rights, life, liberty, and property. When the first draft of the Constitution was written, that's what it said, life, liberty, and property. Jefferson said, well, that's redundant. Everybody knows that life and liberty are property. And so he changed it to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But our Constitution expresses negative rights, what the government is not allowed to do to you, or what the government is not allowed to take from you. What we have here, and there has to be planning, there's no doubt about that, but the planning needs to be done by elected officials who are subject to the call of the voters. What we have here, we have an unelected board who is not subject to anybody, in spite of what they say. If they choose, according to this regulation right here, they can impose zoning, not zoning, but land use planning through this subdivision rules. If the planning is done by elected officials, then at least the people have the right to recall. They have some place to go, but when it is an unelected board, you have nowhere to go. And so that is the main thing that I object to. You know, they're taking your property, and when they come up like this one subdivision I heard up here, beyond like this thing, this hilltop thing, started off just being the ridge tops, and then it got to be anything, you couldn't build on anything above a 30-degree slope, and now you can't build on anything above a 15-degree slope. My gosh, down close to where I live, you know, we got farmers plowing a lot more than 15-degree slopes, and they're bush hogging up and down the hills very rapidly. I'd say coming down. Some of that stuff's 25, 30 degrees. It's still usable land. But once you have these unelected boards created, now that's called a Soviet. We have bureaucrats who are dictating how your property is going to be used beyond the reach of either elected officials, and I don't understand why elected officials are not just irate about this. This shadow government is being created that controls the money, and it's beyond their reach. And when it's beyond the reach of the elected officials, it's beyond the reach of the voters.
If I might just have a word about the Hillside and Ridgetop Protection Plan. That is a plan that was initiated by the City Council and the County Commission of Knox and adopted by the City Council and the County Commission of Knox County. So they initiated the process and they made the final decision on adopting the plan.
Well, I would like to say I'm somewhat relieved that we're only talking about, when I saw this PlanET up here, I misread it at first. I didn't realize, I guess that's Plan for East Tennessee. When I first read it, I thought that they were going to try to control the entire planet. So I'm at least relieved about that.
All right, we have a bid over in this area over here. Bethany, let's come to this middle left table, and then actually hit Robert real quick in the back. I've been telling Robert we're going to be coming back to him for a while. And then we'll come up here where Kevin is and keep making our way around. And just so everybody knows, we are at 15 minutes until 12 o'clock. So, go ahead, Robert.
Oak Ridge over here was talking about money a while ago. In other words, she was asking, you know, what are we paying for this beyond the federal money, you know? And so I'm going to ask for a definition. This is for both sides of the table there too, so I'd like to hear both of your opinions. It was stated earlier, you know, we know what Agenda 21 is. You know, the question is, you know, whether there's an association with local organizations, and I understood these guys' comments. However, there's another agency that you guys said you talked to down in Alabama that hasn't been mentioned much, and I want to make sure I got the connection of where these people are coming from. You called it ICLEI, it's I-C-L-E-I. I know for a fact that the city of Oak Ridge pays dues to this organization to be a member, and that their purpose is to educate and help plan or guide them into the planning of these regional type things. So I know our first Bush and Clanton and Bushes, everybody signed in and agreed to Agenda 21 down in South America, and that is coming from the UN. And then we've got local planners, we got regional. You know, this is something we can associate to. Obviously, some of the people know these guys up here on this planning division because they've talked with them before. So we can identify that they're in our area, and 5 County is our region, so we can talk about that and complain here. But who is ICLEI? What is ICLEI, and what's their role in this, and where are they getting their money? Is this some sort of a quasi-federal organization? You mentioned the other agencies like HUD and all that, how their involvement in it and the regulations we're going to have from that. But where does ICLEI fall into this, and where do they get their money?
Who are you addressing that to first, Robert?
It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter, okay. With these guys, I'll ask, is Knox County or Knox City involved directly or indirectly with the organization that was mentioned? He mentioned that Oak Ridge is paying dues. I can't verify that or not verify that. But is Knox County or Knox City involved indirectly or directly?
Well, neither Jeff nor I are employees of either Knox County or the city, but it's my understanding that the city is a member of ICLEI, and as a result of ideas that have been shared, the city has saved an enormous amount of money by implementing energy reduction policies and programs. So that's the extent of my knowledge of ICLEI.
Gentlemen?
Well, John will speak at much greater length, but I try to put things in simple terms just so you understand the definition of sustainable. Sustainable means that something will last a long time. If you and I are not allowed to use any of it, it'll last practically forever. So the intent of sustainable development is not to develop. The intent of sustainable development is not to allow you to develop most of what you would like to.
You know, this is the document now that everybody's referring to, Agenda 21, that all the government officials like to say we have no knowledge of. ICLAI is listed on page 55, and you can go look up their website. They have a rather extensive website. In Alabama, Huntsville and Birmingham have contracted with them. I'm sure that you can look for Tennessee and see how many other cities or county governments have participated or paid them for their expertise in the implementation of the tenets of sustainable development. So let me just take a moment and read to you page 55, where it says in paragraph 7.2.1, cities of all countries should reinforce cooperation among themselves, and cities of the development countries under the agencies of non-governmental organizations active in this field should, as the International Union of Local Authorities and the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, and then it goes on and talks about the World Federation of Twin Cities. So all three of these organizations are involved in the implementation. ICLAI is probably the best known in this country for having the expertise of greenhouse gas emission regulations, social justice regulations, and environmental justice regulations. Just go to the federal government's Department of Justice and look up environmental justice. I have in my presentation a badge that is from the Criminal Enforcement Division of the EPA. So you can actually commit a crime against Mother Earth. That's exactly where we're going. Sustainable development is a religion. There are various people that adhere to different tenets of this. At one end, you've got the zealots that say you can't take a shovel and go dig on Mother Earth. And at the other level, you've got somebody who's just making money off of it because they understand that there is a profit to be made here. So your money, your tax dollar from this local area is going to this international organization. By the way, they have such a bad name now, they're going to change it. And it is governments for local governments for sustainability. So they're morphing. As you identify and know what kind of organization it is, they'll change their names. And that's a typical thing that you've seen in the past.
And I do believe that change has been very recent, right?
Yeah,
within the past 2 years? Okay. All right, we'll go over here to the next, and Robert, do you feel satisfactory answer there? Okay. Go ahead and get the gentleman in the yellow shirt by the fireplace.
The lovely lady in the green top touched on something a few minutes ago that I want to expand on. When you gave your video presentation, you mentioned a survey, and you showed a slide of a survey that was done, I think, by the University of Tennessee. It seemed to me, in just a quick look I had at it, that the top 4 or 5 comments on that regarded more economic issues than they did planning type issues. And you also stated that we're going to need to provide residences for 300,000 new people and 240,000 jobs in 30 years from now. Now, as a businessman, I can't tell you what the economy is going to be like next year due to economic pressures, due to a lot of government regulation pressures, and I don't see. You know, I guess I'm saying I'm not necessarily accepting your premise on why we need to do what we're doing, because I have no idea that we're going to have 300,000 people additional living in this area in 30 years. Possibly, but it's too far out to know for sure. So I just question the premise of really why you think all this has to be done and what makes you so sure that you're accurate in that premise.
No, like you said, you have no crystal ball, nor do we sitting up here have that crystal ball. But we do know, as Mark alluded to, in the last 60 years, we have grown about 1.5% per year, just pretty much consistently. 1.4 and 1.5% a year. The best guess, the estimate right now is that we will continue to do that based on past trends. So
Given that past trend,
the,
should we not be looking at how this being fair and
accommodate
Audio.
So I guess the question is, we will be growing, whether it's 300,000 or 200,000 in the next 30 or 40 years. Should we not be asking ourselves, how best should we accommodate that growth? It's really what we're asking you, and we're being asked by local governments and state governments to, how are you going to accommodate that growth? Again, whether it's 100,000 or 300,000, there will be growth. How is your transportation system going to accommodate that? Who is going to pay for those transportation infrastructure? How are we going to do that? Where will you provide the schools? Where will you be providing the housing for that? It's all the partnerships. Should we not be asking those questions? That is what planning is about, is asking those questions and hearing from you.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get a follow-up over here, and then we'll probably only have time for one or two more questions. Okay,
Very
I promise
quickly.
that guy in the black hat.
There are 27 principles in the beginning of this book. Number 15 is called the precautionary principle. The federal government has already adopted it. It's being taught in law schools currently. It simply says that you have to come forward to the government and prove that your action on your property will not harm any aspect of sustainable development, be it social, environmental, or economic. So this is a reversal of innocent until proven guilty. You are now guilty, and you have to come forward before a board and prove that your actions are not going to cause harm.
Okay, let's get in another question over here.
Well, let me add to that too. The precautionary principle says that you're required to act if you think it could cause damage, even though, in the words of the document, even though there is no conclusive proof that this damage will occur. So you're being asked at this point to take drastic measures based on what some planner thinks might happen 30 years in the future.
Okay, we're in less than 10 minutes, so let's keep the questions. I know you get it all out, but let's keep it as short as possible, okay? And then we'll get our answers and try to get as many in as we can.
Thank you. My name is Randy. I'm a Knox County resident. I had pre-prepared 5 questions. I'm only going to focus on the one question. Number 4. Questions 1, 2, and 3 really related to all these: sustainable development, Italy, smart growth, questions that have been raised. Question number 5 related to the Charming Woman's question earlier. But question number 4, I found it amusing when I purchased this book this past week called Screwed. No inference intended with the title of the book, but I found it fascinating that on page 70, paragraph 3, and if I could steal Don's approach here in reading a comment from the book, you mentioned rainwater a little bit ago. I never thought much about rainwater until I read page 70, paragraph 3. Houston, Texas taxes rain, and Knoxville, Tennessee is thinking of following suit. I'd like to repeat that sentence before going on to sentence 2 and 3. Houston, Texas taxes rain, and Knoxville, Tennessee is thinking of following suit. Because rainwater runoff from private property pollutes streams, Houston charges a fee that private property owners have to pay when it rains. The city gets $400,000 a year by taxing rain. The American Policy Center reports that some churches in South Carolina pay an annual rain runoff fee of as much as $2,600. My specific question: is Knoxville, Tennessee, in fact, contemplating taxing rain in any manner, under any circumstances.
Let's give him the floor, please.
Once again, I'm not an employee of the city of Knoxville, and I have no idea.
My email address at the top of that separation, feel free to respond to me on any of my questions.
There are many tenets of these regulations that we have not discussed. Impervious surface is one of them. Believe me, they will adopt a local law that says that if you have too much of your property covered by impervious surface, that you will be taxed on that, because it interrupts the natural flow of water into the earthly domain of animals, essentially is what it's all about. And if you go in and look up impervious concrete, they are doing currently experiments with porous concrete. And now some of the cities are ripping up their asphalt and putting down this porous concrete. Now I think anybody that wasn't born last night realizes that when water goes into concrete and it freezes, guess what happens? So, I mean, how illogical this can become is beyond the scope of the average individual. Impervious surface is just one of them.
And with that, it is 12 o'clock. I know that we could sit here all day long. But I want to thank the gentlemen up here who came. Let's go ahead and give them a round of applause. I want to thank all of you who came. And I want to especially thank Richard Esparza of the Tennessee Liberty Alliance. Give them a round of applause as well for putting on this great event. Real quick, before we start standing up and talking to each other and all that, Richard Esparza has some closing words, so if you could just stay seated for just a moment longer and be quiet to just address the crowd.
Yes, I just wanted to make a statement that we do have lunch in the back here, and it will be, we've got 72 pieces of chicken, so if you didn't sign up, and if you did pay at the door and we don't have enough chicken, we're going to try and figure out a different solution. So just to give you all the different wrinkles, it looks like it's going to be buffet. So just as you get ready to leave.
Also remember, after lunch, these gentlemen here at 1 o'clock will be giving a presentation. Thank you for coming. And if you like events like this and want to appreciate the Tennessee Liberty Alliance more, you can donate without having to eat. There's a little jar out here. If you like this event, you're going to have
Somebody gets ready to eat this thing. Follow everybody else. We look either we're on
Everybody having a good time? Good, good, good. David Thompson, everybody.
We're forgetting.
Love him or hate him, he did a great job. He actually got accomplished what to accomplish. Some people didn't like the way he formatted. I thought he did great. One of the people in MPC said they would like to do another forum, so the door is open for more questions with them, open dialogue, so that's always good. But David's getting ready to skedaddle, so if we could have a round of applause for him. But by chance, if you hadn't had a chance to pay for the meal and the room, just thought I'd give you a heads up. Our donation jar is over here on the wall, along with a notepad. And if anybody has an extra pen, they could maybe put that notepad on the pen on the. If you wanted to put, and if you want to write down your email address, contact information, if well.
Just don't
use this one. If you want to be aware of future meetings, I've got a few things going in my head. I don't know even if you wanted to write down a future meeting on that pad, that'd be welcome to do as well, because there's a lot of things going on in America right now that people need to be aware of. So we've got a few different groups in here that organize preparedness meetings, things like that. If the whole country decides to just collapse, the economy collapses, things like that. So if you want information about that, again, you could write it on there. But again, Rocky Top Freedom Campaign had a big hand in putting this together. We've got Patriots of East Tennessee in here. No Knoxville Tea Party, but I'm not sure why that is. But anyway, we do have Anderson County Tea Party in here, and Cross County Patriots, and I'm not sure if there's another group or not, but Sevier County Tea Party. Smoky Mountain Tea Party, Citizens for Blount County's Future. There's several groups to source in this room. So I just wanted to make those mentions. And we do have a bit of a celebrity in the room, which is JB. He's up here on the left. He's the one. Yes, he is a well-known, very educated caller into local talk radio, and he can really make his point. So.
Give NBC that $100,000 money and slap in the back and take away our due process. No, we're not going to do that.
And I'd like to make a motion as a permanent member of the TLA board, and needs to come to some of our meetings. But anyway, without further ado, I'm just going to turn it over to Ken and Don. They can run the show however they want to, and I'll get the podium.
Well, once again, really appreciate you folks turning out. We're going to give you a pretty good introduction, I think, today to sustainable development and Agenda 21. And first of all, we're going to start out by talking about the religious aspects of sustainable development. That'll probably end up scare you to death, and then after that, we'll delve into a lot of the documentation. In fact, most of what we do is present the material from these people themselves. It's not what we say, it's what they say. And Don will do most of the presentation. When your eyes start glazing over a little bit, then I'll chip in and try to wake everybody up and get them back on point, and then we'll go to it from there.
One other thing I forgot to mention is turn your phone on silent.
Yeah, if we see anybody nod off, Ken's going to stand up. And I don't know what action he may take from there, but that's entirely up to him. So, just, yeah, he may have. So, just be aware. Do we need to turn the lights off, or is this visible enough for everybody?
Turn the front ones off?
Yeah, just the front.
Okay, if you can turn the front ones off. Now, I have audio and several videos that has audio. So,
Is that okay? That's good.
Now I can't see. So,
Well, while Don's getting things together here, we never know what we're going to run into. We travel everything we need to do a presentation, but sometimes till the last second we don't know what we need. So he's getting this together so he can actually see what he's doing. But anyway, gentleman that was in the audience a little earlier, I talked to him, and he had a document that said that the city of Knoxville is indeed a member of ICLAE, and I think they paid $1,750 membership last year. So the gentleman sitting at this table didn't seem to know anything about it, which is was amazing that both of them have been in this for years and years and years, and they have no idea who they work for. And of course, I don't think they do. They're supposed to be working for us, but they don't. But anyway, we're going to get going here. Are you ready, Don?
I am now ready, I think. Okay, of course, recognizing and understanding the problem is 50% of the solution. It is a sad state of affairs that we don't understand the problem. We are not able to recognize it. So hopefully this will be just kind of an eye-opener. Certainly I know there are some people here that have been looking into sustainable development for some time, and they are more spooled up on it than most everybody. Sustainable development is a religion, and I think after you see this presentation you may well understand why I have labeled it as a religion. It has a long legislative history in Congress and throughout this country and globe. Go back to NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, 1970. It was passed by a very liberal Congress. Then they waited on Nixon to come into office, and he signed it into law. It has the tenets of sustainable development in it. It's not very long. You need to read it and begin to understand and recognize what language brings up the tenets of this religion. It didn't get its name until 1987 when Grow Harlem Brookland was commissioned by the United Nations to write our global neighborhood. And from that, she then coined the phrase sustainable development, and that is now what we all recognize as this insidious socialism that's being adopted across this country. I go all over the place, and Ken and I, like we said, are going to Australia, where they are much further along than we are. It is the basis upon which society is being restructured. It is intended to be a self-regulating system, a system of governance. And if you'll notice that governance is a word that is replacing government, and that is actually a coalition of government, corporations, and non-governmental organizations. So you may have, for instance, somebody was talking about Habitat for Humanity, which the creator of that organization was at Habitat 2 in 1996 in Istanbul, and he said the agenda of the United Nations and our agenda are one and the same. So there are many, many good organizations that have part of sustainable development in its intent or objective. It's just that we need to begin to recognize that. This is now a slide that I put together. Most of the slides, as Ken said, are going to be slides from proponents. I believe that the people in the 1930s in Germany were vehement about their position, and I think after you see some of the video that you're going to see today, we have people that are just as ardent, just as enthusiastic about their belief system, and the end result is going to be the same. We just have to be observant as to what's occurring here. Now, the United States has agreed to submit reports on a regular basis to the UN detailing what we have done to implement the tenets of sustainable development. And this is from the 2002 report. It is 156 pages long. Nothing is secret. It is all out there. All you have to do is just read it. You can go to the United Nations website. There is a database for every country in this world. It's alphabetical. Pull that down and go down to the United States of America, and that's where I got this copy. Community block development grants are one of the biggest things that's listed in this particular document, and those grants are going out all across this country. In Birmingham, in the Inslee area, we got a $51 million grant in order to tear down the 1950s low-income housing and put in nice, sustainable housing. You probably have Hope 6 projects going on here. There are many, many things that are listed in this report detailing what has been done and what is going on. This is the index page for the conference that was held in 2002. By the way, George Bush, now the 41st President of the United States, went and signed Agenda21 in 1992. 2002 was the 10th anniversary. They were celebrating what had been done, looking forward to the coming future so that they could implement more of socialism. So now, when I punch the button in just a few minutes, it's going to be a total of 9 slides. And by the way, if it's too low, let me know. And there is a man that is in the opening ceremony, and he was talking to a very young group of people and telling them what is wrong with Mother Earth. He has a very heavy accent, so I printed the words on top of the screen so you can follow along what he had to say. And you're going to see photographs of what was occurring on stage in this particular conference back in 2002. And then at the end of 7 slides, you're going to see 2 slides where Colin Powell, who was at the time Secretary of State, say that you and I and President Bush have an enduring commitment to sustainable development. So theoretically, everything should work. Let me know if it's too low.
Life began with the S, then came the plants, the animals, and finally the human being. Yes, we are all children of Mother Earth. That is why we must take care of her and be her custodian. She is the hand that feeds us and the heart that heals us. But I'm sad to say, we are failing. Greed and foolishness are eating deep into the fabric of humankind. We are failing to love and care for Mother Earth. This summit has selected a new vision of sustainable development. The Johannesburg Plan of Action consolidates our programs into one common agenda that includes our next statement on sustainable development. Ladies and gentlemen, President Bush and the American people have an enduring commitment to sustainable development.
Okay, that was 2002. Let's count 10 years. And we just had another conference, another great celebration of this glorious socialism that's being introduced. Here now is an excerpt from our current, or Obama's current Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. This speech was actually 13 minutes long. I took out about 2 to 3 minutes just to kind of give you an idea of flavor of what she had to say. So here we go.
We have coalesced around an outcome document that marks a real advance for sustainable development. We know this is one of the most pressing matters of our time because how we grow together over the long term isn't a question for only some countries. It is a question for all countries. A more prosperous future is within our reach. A future where all people benefit from sustainable development, no matter who they are or where they live. And that is why in the 21st century, the only viable development is sustainable development. We also have to be thinking different about development in our cities. Under the joint initiative on urban sustainability that President Rousseff and President Obama kicked off last year, we are bringing political officials from every level, from state, county, local, municipalities together, along with industry leaders and developers to find creative ways to generate sustainable economic growth. Let's use the private sector, particularly the consumer goods companies, as they have agreed to do, to make sure they have sustainable supply chains, the right kind of packaging and marketing that puts the least amount of burden on the earth we share. Let's bring in the nonprofits, the civil society organizations, faith groups, individuals, all of us, committed to realizing the sustainable development goals that we have embraced. We know that we will be judged not by what we say or even by what we intend to do, but by whether we deliver results for people alive today and whether we keep faith with future generations. I'm very honored to be here with all of you, and I pledge my country, the Obama administration's, and my own personal efforts to continue our work together. We simply cannot afford to fail. Thank you all very much.
Well, that was the national and international level. Now you're going to see 5 minutes of testimony. Now this person that is giving this testimony is at the Urban Committee in the Senate. I think it was 2009. Her name is Mrs. Googe. She was at the time the Carroll County Commissioner. She was also the representative of the National Association of County Commissions. And she told, in this next 5 minutes, all of what is going on, or has gone on in the past 20 years with the implementation process. So let me spool it up. It takes about 24 seconds for it to do that. And you're going to see our senator, Senator Shelby. He's been in there a long time. He's supposed conservative, has not opened his mouth, knows very well that this is part and parcel of the United Nations agenda, and won't speak to the issue. He bears more responsibility than does Dodd, who is a proponent. So if you have an elected official in an office that won't recognize it, you need to vote him out.
My privilege to represent NACO today. NACO is the only national organization representing America's 3,068 counties. Supports the Liberals Community Act, provides incentive grants to local areas for regional planning around housing, transportation, environment, energy, land use, and health initiatives. Last year, NACO passed a resolution supporting your legislation. Rural, suburban, and urban counties have been pursuing local strategies to create livable communities and implement sustainable development for decades. NACO has worked to support our members in achieving sustainable development for more than 15 years through assistance on issues including smart growth and planning, sustainable economic development, and business retention. Priorities now include clean energy development and disaster recovery. In 2007, NACO began the Green Government Initiative, providing comprehensive resources for local government on all things green. Planning for sustainable communities is by nature a regional effort, whether individually with neighboring jurisdictions or through regional councils. Counties have the primary role in planning and economic development decisions impacting and determining growth, development, and livability. Many rural and mid-sized counties would want to begin sustainable planning and development, but lack the resources to do so. The grants would be available to meet the needs of the counties to begin the process for sustainable development or for implementation, which is why this legislation is so very important. Carroll County, Maryland has a population of 175,000. We have created 3 LEED certified green buildings, which are oriented for site optimum lighting and solar control, extensive stormwater management, geothermal systems, and the use of high recycled content materials. To reduce our carbon footprint, we invested in the purchase of hybrid cars for our fleet, as well as hybrid vans for our transportation system within Carroll County. Carroll County also participates in the Energy Management Initiative provided through partnerships with the Baltimore Metropolitan Council, or the BMC. We are an active participant on the Regional Sustainable Council of the BMC, promoting coordinated policies amongst regional districts and jurisdictions to adopt alternative energy and sustainable plans. To preserve our rural history, we implemented an installment purchase plan for farm preservation, and this allows us to purchase development rights by leveraging our money so more land can be purchased at today's price. To date, we have placed over 60,000 acres into permanent preservation on our farms, and our goal is 100,000 acres, which is 1/3 of our county. NACO continues to believe sustainability and encouraged through a federal grant program, rewarding regions and communities undertaking sustainable programs. NACO believes all communities should be eligible for the program, and we support funds being set aside for a subcategory of all rural areas. Efforts at local and regional planning are hindered when federal funds are not granted directly to local governments. NACO appreciates the bill allows counties to receive the funding directly, and I think that's most important. And so today I do thank you for the opportunity to testify. We appreciate the opportunity, Chairman Dodd, and look forward to working.
Well, thank you very much.
You notice there that they took 1/3 of the county, or that was their goal, basically off the tax rolls and out of production for anything but minimal farm usage. The people of her county, now this woman was the head of the National County Commissioners Association. She'd been at this for 20 years. The people of her county were so appreciative of what she had done that they threw her and the other county commissioners, I think only one of them survived, they threw them out of office. The people who replaced them are traveling the country now telling everybody about the evils of sustainable development and how to avoid this. So here we got this person who was very high up in the National County Commissioners Association. They still follow that path. They pass that information down to the state County Commissioners Association, and they pass it right down to the local level to your county commissioners. Now, I haven't looked at your site in Tennessee, but in Alabama, they have a website and they have 11 different tax increases that they want to impose on Alabama citizens based on sustainable development. So you need to look at what your county commissioners are doing and what they're being advised to do by the state and by the local associations so that you know how to prepare and defend yourself.
Remember that I was talking about the notice of funds available, and part of that list that is a requirement is to set aside open space. Your local commission here is going to set aside open space, the very same thing that she was talking about. That county was going into debt to buy the land and take it off the tax rolls. This is a killer for county governments. Just imagine what it's going to do if they take 1/3 of the county, how much tax revenue is lost and how much is going to have to be made up by the other property owners. Now, let me say about this, what you're about to see now. If you're squeamish, you need to get up and leave the room right now. Because what I'm about to show, in one case, the lady says, oh, we can't show that. It is just too graphic. Well, I'm going to talk about how graphic it is afterwards and why we need to see this. This is for some of you that perhaps have seen this, I've shown it before, it is an ad trying to induce and cajole and encourage people to reduce their carbon footprint. Remember, Mrs. Googe was talking about that, and it's part of the requirement for the notice of funds available criteria. So it is English. It is a little bit hard to understand, but here we go, and let's see if we can get this spooled up. And there's no pressure here, by the way.
Right, kids, just before you go, there's a brilliant idea in the air that I'd like to remind you. Now, it's called 10-10. The idea is everyone starts cutting their carbon emissions by 10%, thus keeping the planet safe for everyone eventually. Now, this hasn't got to be a huge thing, but I would love it if you and your families to think about doing something.
What sort of thing, Liz?
Well, like getting your dad to installate a loft, or taking your next holiday by train instead of flying, or buying energy-saving light bulbs. We're thinking of using our car less. I'm going to Michael's school. That's fantastic, Jemima. Now, no pressure at all, but it'd be great to get a sense of how many of you might do this. Just a rough percentage. That's fantastic. And then not. Philip and Tracy. Fine, that's absolutely fine. It's your own choice. Okay, class, thank you so much for today, and I will see you all tomorrow. Oh, just before you go, I just need to press this little button here. Now, everybody, please remember to read chapters 5 and 6 on volcanoes and glaciations, except Philip and Tracy, of course.
Right, just want to check on that 10-10 thing. Had some brilliant ideas from lots of you how the firm could cut down emissions by 10%. Just quick show of hands, everyone who wants to get involved. Great, that's nearly everybody. And yeah, just for the record, No pressure on. Those who aren't quite convinced by it yet? Cool. No problem. Your choice. Okay, so those of you planning something here or at home should probably get working on it. Oh, gorgeous. Those of you who aren't, excellent. Great weekend, everyone.
Well, hello everyone. It's great to be back here at first. So many happy memories for me. Anyway, tell me something. What is this 10-10 thing the club is doing?
Well, it means that we're trying to cut our carbon emissions by 10% this year. And Tottenham Hotspur Football Club was the first to sign up. We've changed the floodlights on our lane, so no energy. Lots of our fans come to matches on buses, trains, bikes and stuff, rather than going by car.
I see. Whatever, I wouldn't do it. It seems like distraction from football to me.
That's just fine, David. You don't have to join in, just ignore it. No pressure. Right, let's listen to
10-10. Hundreds of thousands of people, schools, businesses, hospitals, movie stars, knitting circles, scout troops, presidents and governments, all tackling climate change in more than 40 countries. Care to join us? No pressure. Is that okay?
Sounded great to me. Thanks, Julie.
Happy to help.
So what are you thinking of doing for 10-10 yourself?
What, are you kidding me? I thought that by doing this voiceover, that was my contribution.
Right. No, absolutely. No pressure.
Okay.
Fine.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, now I want you to notice there is an eyeball that floats down here and one there. And what does this have to do with Agenda 21? It's one of 3 treaties in Agenda 21. The Biodiversity Treaty is the other. This one is the Climate Change Treaty, as it used to be called. Now it's greenhouse gas emissions or whatever other label that they want to put on it. But it is one that is really going to bear down on us, as you will see as we move through this thing a little bit. Now I want to make the point that during World War II, there was a decision made that the horrific images that they were able to produce in World War II were not to be shown to the general public back home, because we may lose our emphasis on supporting the men in the battlefield. Well, when our men, who by the way had seen all that war could offer, walked into the death camps, they said, we can't let this be swept under the rug. We have to show what has occurred here. And what occurred at those death camps was the result of a socialist agenda. And it was the pictures were made after it had occurred. We now have the opportunity to see how the socialists now view us and what they think ought to happen to us if we don't cower and do what they think we should do with our carbon emissions. Now, how does that apply to you in this local area? Well, we were earlier talking about the Knoxville Citizens Guide to Sustainability. This is available on their website, and it talks about your carbon footprint. And it says that a carbon footprint is a measure of the impact our activities have on the environment. The measurement calculates the amount of greenhouse gas produced in our daily lives and throughout activities like burning fossil fuels for energy, material use, and then transportation, and of course water use. All of these things are part of asset management. That is part of the notice of information funds available. That is part of the criteria that regulations have to be written for. It's part of reducing your carbon footprint. It's not just cranking your automobile, because everything you access from Mother Earth is a depletion of resources for future generations. And that, if you're taking notes, is intergenerational equity. We also have another point that is intra-generational equity, which is the distribution of resources across the current generation. Everything has to be exploited equally. It's not that we use resources that the Creator has given to us. It's that we are exploiting Mother Earth's resources, and it just has to be shared across the generation equally. Now, intergenerational looks ahead into the future and determines how much resources of Mother Earth is going to be required for those resources, and we have to restrict what we take from her in order to provide for future generations. There is another point in sustainable development, is species equity, because not only do we have to be kind and distribute everything equally among human beings, but among other species that just haven't quite evolved to the state that we have. Now, that sounds like a big, big thing that, oh, that's never going to occur. Unfortunately, we have been acclimated to this for a number of years. When the Endangered Species Act came out probably 30, 35 years ago, as a result of NEPA, government sat on the throne where God rightfully sits and says that frog has more rights than you do. So government actually took the sovereign act of God and said, you don't have any more rights than that frog. We are assigning rights to that frog, and you have to kowtow to us. We need to have sermons that preach this from the pulpit, and we need to begin to understand that this is a religion that's been codified into law already. So now let me go on. Results of a carbon footprint calculation show that you are consuming more of one person's needs for resources. So somebody's going to sit down and calculate, and part of that information that's required under the Notice of Information, for funds available, is that households have to be assigned a certain value, and you can't go over that because you won't have carbon credits because you're polluting too much of Mother Earth. And here now is the soft cell. What you saw in the video was the hard cell. I'm sure this will come to the hard cell at some point locally in Knoxville area. Now that's right, no pressure. Back in 2009, these two gentlemen introduced into the state legislature of Tennessee this law, and it says that on paragraph F, install, construct, add to, improve, or reconstruct public infrastructure, including but not limited to water, solid waste, transportation, communication, energy use capture, transmittal, power systems, It goes on, and in the very last part of the sentence, it says that this is, let's see, punch the right button, might help. That will incorporate principles of urban sustainability and global sustainable development. So, now I was talking to somebody yesterday and said that this may not apply to the entire state of Tennessee, but even if that's true, this is a state law that would be applicable to some part of Tennessee. So if you were to introduce a law, as Alabama has done, and it should pass, this has to be dealt with. Now, I think that there are some people that have recognized that, but at any rate, you need to remove this from your state statute. And if these two gentlemen won't look at the evidence, they need to be voted out just like we need to vote out Senator Shelby in Alabama. Now, there is this proclamation. This came from Lewis County, Tennessee, and I have a handout in the lobby, and it says right in the highlighted area, by the way, this is a signed proclamation from the transition community. There is a global movement across this world to bring communities at the local level into sustainable development. Permaculture, in other words, permanent agriculture, is to be used to transition from a free enterprise system to one of sustainability. Here is a proclamation from Lewis County, Tennessee, where these officials have said, in the highlighted section, that everyone should adopt the principles of sustainable development and inspire their neighbors to do the same thing. So these are just some of the examples now that have gone on locally in your area. Now, you will hear planners talk about sustainable community, and you'll read it. If you go and ask a planner, he's going to say, well, gee, I'd like to tell you what a sustainable community is, but you have to define it because we're here looking for your input. And it's, after all, whatever you want it to be is what a sustainable community is. Well, you know as well as I do that there's definitive answers to all of this. And by the way, on our website, keepourrights.org, if you scroll down to the left-hand side, there's a glossary of terms. It's like 14 pages. You need to get that glossary, and you need to read the terms, because if you sit down with a planner or some elected official that has been schooled in this, they well know the definitions of the phrases that they are familiar with. And if you don't get the definition either explicitly written into the document or know exactly what's going on, you'll wind up with an agreement that will put you behind the 8 ball. Now let me tell you where this definition came from, because this is authoritative. This was submitted to the United Nations Habitat II Conference back in 1996 by the Washington State University School of Architect. The name of this program is a comprehensive urban regenerative process. I downloaded the whole program. It's multi-page long, and here now is a definition of sustainable community. It is one which provides all of its own needs for air, water, land, fiber, food or fiber, energy resources within the confines of its own site.
No bananas.
No bananas to eat, exactly. And we'll get into food shed in just a minute. So this is the objective. Is it going to happen? Well, if we do nothing, certainly we'll get much further down this road than you can imagine. And I was talking to someone earlier about the Hunger Games. Believe me, this will make you hungry in the end. So, we also have an example. This is freedom of choice. Now, this is in a document published by the state of Minnesota. Here's a copy of it. You can get this online. I happened to get in early enough to get a hard copy of it. And the name of it is Under Construction Tools and Techniques for Local Planning. On page 76, it has the definition for freedom of choice. Now, if I were to say to you, you have freedom of choice, you would have some concept of what I was talking about. But if you talk to a planner, freedom of choice has an entirely different meaning. And it says that people should be able to choose where they live and do business as long as they pay the identifiable cost of those choices, and do not impose unaccounted for cost on other people or nature, that's species equity, now or in the future. That's intergenerational equity. You're not paying those costs currently, and you have to be assessed those costs. That is what is going to have to be added to the tax structure as we move forward. Now, this is a slide that I use to define this thing in the subject matter, because sustainable development covers quite literally every aspect of our life. And in my opinion now, I think that the pulpit, the silent pulpit, needs to come alive and begin to speak to each one of these issues and how it relates to sustainable development, and how ungodly and how socialistic this is if we are ever to make any headway. We need a third Great Awakening in this country. Now, I'm going to use this slide. Every time you see this slide, I'm changing subject, and I'm picking up on some other aspect on this particular slide. And I want to talk about food policy. Food policy is something that is just now coming into vogue. And here now is from Clackamas County, Oregon, a Green Ribbon Committee. And we have an urban center and a metropolitan food shed, meaning that everything that is grown in that food shed is to be consumed in the urban center. Literally, that is the objective. Now, we'll get there by other means. For instance, we'll have locally grown food. We'll support our local farmers. Actually, it is a way of committing suicide slowly by the family farmer. And notice that we have food shed, woodshed, and they do need to be taken to the woodshed. I really believe that. Watershed and energy shed, because literally that definition that you just saw is a reflection of what is in this PowerPoint from Clackamas County, Oregon. Literally everything is to be produced within the confines of its own site. Here is the state law for the state of Georgia, HB 225. They just passed this past year in Georgia. This is also one of the handouts. And it says that sustainable agriculture is now the law in the land of Georgia. Anything that is not grown or not in compliance with this particular code is null and void in the state of Georgia. In Birmingham, we have food partners that have created a food charter. And part of social justice, by the way, sustainable development has social justice aspects in it. It says that the access to nutritious, affordable, culturally appropriate, and safe food is a basic human right. Well, it's going to be a committee to determine what's appropriate and what's safe. I mean, I just heard the other day that some restaurant chain, I think it was in New York, already took up the salt shakers off the table. So, I mean, this is here, people. We need to begin to understand it. In Alabama, we've already had 3 food summits statewide that I know of. This was held at the United Methodist Church in Eastlake in the Birmingham area. And this was actually a front page article for a local newspaper. And let me punch the wrong button. Ken and I put together a brochure that talks about sustainable agriculture. And that's one of the handouts. And by the way, I can get you this document without our logo on it. On the back side, it has our logo. So if you want the document to put your logo on to be a local contact point for you, then please do that. We don't need to be contacted about something that's going on locally here. Don't reinvent the wheel. If you find something that somebody already has, ask if you can use that particular thing to your advantage, and certainly I want to extend that to anyone here. What happens in Alabama is, oh, and by the way, let me show you that logo right there. ASAN, Alabama Sustainable Agricultural Network. And their 990 forms are on the internet. The federal government is funding them. They are building a coalition with other left-wing groups. They are going to Montgomery, and they are lobbying for certified organic food. As a matter of fact, we had a law that almost passed this past legislative session that said that there would be a governmental entity set up to certify green farmers or organic farmers, and then certify the restaurant that buys those locally grown foods. Well, that excludes the farmer that can't adhere to the BMPs, the best management practices, and will slowly squeeze out everybody except for ConAg and all the other big agricultural companies. I mean, this goes right down the line of doing away with the family farm. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the trap here, you hear a lot of, there's a lot of legislation trying to be passed to encourage local farmers. You know, the schools are going to buy food from local farmers, they're going to sell it, whatever, and it all sounds good and wonderful on the surface. But they're also working on legislation, and they're very close to having this, that says that, of course, even now, you can't eat anything in a public school or in a restaurant that is not inspected by the federal government or one of their divisions. We've seen information that says that, well, the federal government is really too busy to be inspecting all of these little farms, so unless you produce, say, 350 tons per year of a product, it's not worth their while to inspect you. So these farmers are getting suckered in to go into this organic food thing and this sustainable development food chain, not realizing that eventually they're going to be trapped, unable to sell their products because they're not going to be large enough to be inspected. So that's the trap. They're giving them the hook, you know, they're giving money, and they're trying to encourage them to do this, but in the future it's going to be the thing that will bankrupt them and put them out of business.
The brochure on your left is one from New Orleans. I was down in Louisiana. They're having the very same problems in Louisiana, and this is a very expensive brochure that was talking about a conference they held back in 2010. And notice it says food, culture, justice. So we have incorporation of social justice within this, and this was like a 12-page brochure. Very expensive. There's some money flowing in from somewhere regarding all this. Food policy councils are popping up. Is it not allowed now? Okay, please, yeah, let me know. Food policy councils are popping up all across this country. And here's one example of a food charter, and let me get into some of the language. The term food citizenship is defined as the practice of engaging in food-related behaviors that support rather than threaten the development of a democratic, socially and economically just and environmentally sustainable food system. So, now, I was talking to someone earlier. Believe me when I say you have to enthusiastically adopt the tenets of this. You're not going to sit on that fence at all. Having no opinion threatens your food citizenship. So you need to be aware that just like the greenhouse gas emissions where there's no pressure, well, there's no pressure with your food citizenship either. Food democracy or food citizenship recognizes that consumers can identify the interests of who? Other workers, other consumers, future generations. Enter generational equity, and other species equity. You need to recognize the phrases that bring out the tenets of sustainable development. Now, why is this particular quote important? Because it was in the doctorate thesis for a student at Drexel University a number of years ago. That's how far this philosophy has already gotten into our educational system. So here was a person looking for a doctorate, and she puts this phrase in there, hoping to gain acceptance in the ivory tower of education. Locavore, consuming foods that are grown or harvested within 100 miles. And I have actually met a couple of people that claim to be locavores. I had never seen this phrase until I began to looking at food policy. And these are two magazines in business, and they have an article about locavore. And here is the 100-mile diet. And notice that this individual has used a mode of transportation that is kind to Mother Earth, and has not used 1 ounce of petrol, 1 ounce of gasoline, has pedaled out into the farmland.
What are the tires made of? That's made of.
Well, let's don't get there yet. That comes later. That comes later. Remember, his sin is less than yours because you would drive.
He needs the red button up there.
No pressure. Okay, this is actually a poster. It's a TIFF file, huge file, and it's intended to be printed out. It would probably be much larger than this picture right here for the schools, intended to teach children. And it says food miles is simply the distance that food travels to the consumer, where it's ultimately consumed. Well, it goes on and says that some, but not all external costs, such as transportation, soil degradation, irrigation-related groundwater depletion. Didn't we have somebody talk about stormwater just a few minutes ago? That would relate to that. Pesticide and fertilizer misuse. Fertilizer's been declared by the USDA to be a pollutant. So now imagine that a 9 or 10-year-old student is sitting there listening to the teacher go over all of the harmful things that happen to Mother Earth just because you're going to eat that carrot that was flown in on that airplane. So you can imagine how the indoctrination is taking hold, and these children won't hold the same tenets, the same principles that we do as adults. Let me go on now and pick up on another subject and talk about transportation and sustainable development. Go ahead, Ken. I see you pick the mic up.
Before you get to that, I want you to think about the incompatibility of what we're seeing here and what planners tell us that they are doing. On one hand, they're telling us we have to reduce our carbon footprint. We have to eat locally grown foods only within our area. And when they say locally grown in the food shed, they mean that inside a certain perimeter, whatever they decide to put out there, 25 miles, 30 miles, maybe 100 miles if it's a big city, you have to be able to produce all the food that you eat, all the fuel that you consume. You have to have enough trees to produce the oxygen that you breathe. You have to be able to catch water in your area, enough water so that you don't degrade Mother Earth to provide for yourself. Now, Al Gore has made statements several times that Mother Earth cannot support more than 1.5 billion people. Last time I looked, we got 7.3 billion people right now. Now, what are they going to do with that other 6 billion people?
They'll kill them.
But when you look at what the planners want to do, where they're putting more and more land off limits for agriculture, for real agriculture, and for other things, they are reducing your ability to grow your own foods, and they're also reducing your tax base so you can't operate your government. Now, those two things are incompatible. So at some point down the road, either by attrition or otherwise, they firmly intend to reduce the population of Mother Earth.
That's right.
And that's a harsh thing to say, that people are contemplating the death of those who disagree with them, but I mean, I hope you agree with me. No pressure. No pressure.
Okay. All right, let me pick up on transportation. I always thought that transportation was merely a means of getting me from point A to point B. And it clearly says right up here at the top, by the way, that transportation is not an end of itself. It is merely a means which we support individual and collective goals and objectives. Well, is that not socialism? I mean, that's the very definition of what socialism is. So let me pick up on a report, and the name of this report is Transportation Funding for the State of South Carolina, 2003 through 2022. And in this particular report, it says that equity issues include income distribution, urban, rural, and regional geographic differences. And what's that next phrase? Intergenerational equity or concerns. So transportation is to have the tenets of sustainable development, social, economic, and environmental wrapped up in the regulations regarding transportation. Now, when Tuscaloosa got hit with the storms here just recently, a year ago, if you're as old as I am, that's recent, the federal government, FEMA, came in and gave them lots of money. They held out their hand and FEMA just loaded it up with money. One of the tenets of this was to rewrite the comprehensive plan. And here now is part of Chapter 6, by the way, of this plan is specifically devoted to sustainable development. But the rest of it is just wasting. Multiple modes of transportation provide options to reduce vehicle demand, that's VMTs. Community connections help to support strong, stable, and enduring neighborhoods. Now, who would disagree with that? You know, that really does sound normal and sounds like we could support it. But in fact, if you know the tenets of it, you know exactly where this is going. This is a report for the state of Tennessee. This is actually the cover for this report. Go out and look it up. Sustainable Transportation in Tennessee, January of 2009, the very same year that the other law was passed in the state legislature. It says the first approach starts with the premise that we need to convince people to change the way they live. Now that's a pretty hard statement. Then it goes on and says the primary objective of this approach is to reduce vehicle miles traveled, VMTs, by restructuring society and such that our needs for shopping, personal and social services, recreation can be met by community, by just traveling short distances. And that's how society is going to be restructured. And the choices on the VMTs, if you go and look, you'll always hear these planners say, we need to provide you with choices. Now this is the government telling you they're going to provide you with choices. And they are walking, bicycle, and public transportation. You'll never see other modes of transportation provided. Rickshaw, yeah. Pedicabs. Okay, now remember I was talking about a governance system, and I'm only going to pull out one quote from Agenda21. And this is chapter 40.4. It's a 3-sentence paragraph. I'm going to look at 2 particular sentences. And it says, commonly used indicators such as the gross national product, which measures individual resource flows or pollution flows, do not provide adequate indicators of sustainability. This was 1992. We don't have the ability to determine individual resource flows. So, indicators of sustainable development need to be developed to provide solid basis for decision making at all levels of government in order to produce a sustainable system. Now, let me go into what we're actually talking about. Here is the I-95 Coalition, and that's their emblem over there in blue. It covers every department of transportation from Florida all the way to Maine on the East Coast. It includes some authorities in Canada. There are actually 35 authorities or organizations that belong to this coalition. And they have this report. If you want to type it down, it's only 34 pages, or write it down, it's only 34 pages long. It is a multi-state VMT-based fee, institutional, and legal analysis. Along about the middle of this report, it gets into great detail about what this coalition wants to do. Essentially, they want to take the information from your onboard computer, which also has a GPS tracking device in it, and when you pull up to the gas pump to purchase gasoline, it would examine where you've been and when you were there. May even monitor weather conditions, so that if you have driven through an area where there's a frog that's been declared a significant species, and you have endangered the environment for that frog, you're going to pay more for the gasoline. Now, let's say that you drive through a socially unjust area, and you could even go back and look at your lineage. If your mother was born with a silver spoon and you were born with a silver spoon, well, you may pay more just because of your ancestry in order to offset social unjust acts that had occurred against other population segments. That's just some of the reasoning that goes in behind this. Now, it gets into a discussion, says, well, we're not sure that local municipalities would buy into this. My personal opinion is that the further we go down this road of economic disaster, this is not anybody that has to legislate anything. You want the gasoline, you're going to pay the price. It's going to be a governance system that regulates the software that determines what you pay, and if you are indeed going to be able to get it at all. And all the local municipality has to do is hold out their hand, and the federal government is going to put a check in off of what you have to pay. So, let me now go on to another subject, land use planning and greening development. And this is one of the other 3 treaties. This is the Biodiversity Treaty. Has not been adopted by the Senate, but it has been signed by the President, and it is being implemented through the executive branch. So now when they talk about open space, green space, this is exactly what they're talking about. And this is the Southeastern Ecological Framework, and this is this slide now is produced by EPA Region 4. This has been on the internet for a number of years, and it gets in and explains what this program is about. Now, I think a lot of y'all have already seen Dr. Kaufman's map. I used to use Dr. Kaufman's map, but it's his map. It's his opinion of what is occurring. This is not somebody's opinion like me. You know, I wear a tinfoil hat and I don't mind telling you. This is the federal government. All the green area is no human intrusion zone. There is a 10% buffer zone, and 40% of the remaining landmass is where we're going to be moved into. I do not think that it's going to be at the muzzle end of gun, but it's going to be through septic tank regulations, high gasoline prices, any kind of tax or incentive to get you out of this area will be used, and it won't take long at $6, $7 a gallon of gasoline to begin to make people think about moving. So now let me go on and go down to the next slide in this particular PowerPoint presentation. And we have one echo hub on one side, and we have an echo hub on the other side. Now the documentation, and there's lots of paperwork that goes along with this. There's one document that's over 300 pages long that describes all this stuff. They being federal government, wants a predator animal such as a bear or a wolf. By the way, it's called pre-Columbian. In other words, all of the animals that were here before European men came are to be reintroduced. All of the species that European man brought are considered invasive species and have to be removed.
Including their children. Could be.
Have no idea. At any rate, we want a wolf to be able to move through this interconnecting corridor from this hub, Greenway, exactly, over to this hub in order that their gene pool not be degraded for the next 1,000 years.
That's the new interstate.
That's the new interstate. And Ken has a wonderful statement about this. Let Ken jump it right in.
Yeah, I just noticed that the urban area there, they don't allow us any escape. And I think what's supposed to happen, we're all supposed to inbreed until we all become liberal.
Could happen. Okay. Interconnecting corridor. Now this slide is not from EPA Region 4. This is a Federal Highway Administration. And it depicts that interconnecting corridor. I would imagine that black line is probably 2 acres or wider. So you can kind of get an idea about how wide this is. And those animals, those predator animals, are supposed to be able to move from one hub to the other. 5,000 acres or larger can be 1 acre. Depends on what the stakeholder groups comes around and assigns a specific area. They may determine that a small mud puddle is a ecologically significant area and designate it as a hub without any interconnecting corridor.
Well, and this serves a couple of purposes. Not only do they get this land, but they're also taking control of all of our sources of water. When you start looking at water pollution and surface runoff regulations, and when they back you up from the streams and back you up from the rivers, for a small stream it may just be 50 feet. For something larger it can be a couple of 100 feet. Along the Tennessee River and the big waterways, they want to actually back you up 2.5 miles. So what they end up with is control of our water as well as control of an awful lot of our land. And when looking into the future, believe me, water is going to be more important than oil one of these days.
Let me go through the language on this slide. Linear features linking core areas wind through human-dominated land like agriculture or development allow animal, seed, and pollen movement between core areas. I don't know how to make it any more plain. I'm telling you that this is what the federal government's doing, and I think in that language right there, sir.
Before everybody leaves, if they see these two maps over here to your left and to our right.
Yes.
Take a look at those before you leave, and you will see what Knox County has done with planning. You'll see the, what do you call these areas, the green areas?
The interconnecting corridor.
You'll be able to see some of those on
Right. And they usually go by other names and conservation. There's a whole litany of vehicles, legal vehicles, to try to get land into this category. Now, I don't have, the Southeastern Ecological Framework was on the internet. Unfortunately, the federal government, EPA, took it off of the GeoCommons website. They have other data sets up there, but this particular data set they took off. If you know of some elected official that has the political muscle, he can likely get the entire set, and if he does, I would love to get my hands on these, because I used to just go out and get the map for the specific county I was going to, and I could zoom in at the local, I could even pull up the street level and see whether or not it was green or not. Now this is Greene County, Tennessee. This is as close as I could get to this locality. Now when I punch the button, the green area is going to come into view, and you're going to see how much land is set aside in this area of Tennessee, and you'll get some idea of what's going to be left in your area.
Everything that's green, no matter what shade, is going to be human-free. The very, very pale green, some of that is considered buffer zone. It's highly regulated as to what you're allowed to do. But you have the human-free animal areas, which are huge, and then you have restricted areas to keep the human beings from polluting the animals. And there's not much left for the people.
Let me say that this dark green is the hub area. This lighter green is the PEAs or SEAs, and that is priority ecological area or sensitive ecological area. And so it holds essentially the same designation as does the core area or the interconnecting corridor. Ken wanted me to put that particular slide back up. You want to go over that, Ken?
Well, I just wanted to put that back up so that you can see the size of this. I mean, you know, this is just, I think, 13 states here, and it's not just the Southeast, it's the entire United States. The Wildlands Project, their goal is to take 50% of North America and make it human-free with another 10% buffer zone. And the rest of the 40% that's left, that's where the humans supposedly are going to be allowed to live. But what we're going to end up with, folks, is we're going to be living on an island basically surrounded by our food shed, and we have to produce everything that we use where the animals can roam free. I'm not sure that that's what our founding fathers had in mind. I don't think so.
Let me say that I have the webinar that I just recorded recently from officials of EPA Region 4 and other EPA regions where they were talking about this program. And EPA Region 4 had quit mapping the rest of the United States, but have, in this webinar, they had said that they had begun again to map out the rest of the United States. I did read that, I think it was 2010, they were supposed to have all of these maps available online, but it just didn't happen. And in this webinar, I found out that indeed they are remapping or beginning the mapping process again. Now, if you go in and look for a Canadian ecological framework, you will find the very same maps. And we're going to Australia. Australia has the same maps that we do. I'm trying to get enough of those screenshots so I can do the same thing in Australia and make a comparison, because this is a global program that's going on. Now, one of the handouts, or not handout, but DVDs that I have is this DVD. This is South Carolina, and it is very unfortunate that we are all here, white people, and I'll just be blunt with you. The blacks are being set on first It's unfortunate that if you're, and it might really make a difference whether you're black. Typically, if you have a lesser education, less income, you're going to be less aware of what's going on. And those people are having their land taken currently through blight legislation and blight designation. So I'm going to punch the button in just a few minutes. You're going to see a 3-minute excerpt in which Joe Neal, now Joe Neal is the state representative on the left side of the screen right there, and he's going to talk about what private property rights mean to the individual. And it's very unfortunate that property rights were being taken in Richland County at the time. And this is probably the best explanation I have ever seen regarding property rights. So, and by the way, I would use this presentation to go to black churches and try to get a coalition, because if we could get black people to understand that we're just being all put on the plantation, and we need help. We don't need to be seen as divided Americans. Diversity is not, we can have a diverse society, black, white, red, makes no difference. But what unifies us is an understanding of rights, where they come from, and how to protect your private property rights. And believe me, because somebody wrote a law in Nashville that property rights are protected, that doesn't mean anything. It only means that property rights are protected because you're willing to stand up for your neighbor. And if believe me, if they take his property rights, who's next on the list? Okay, here we go. Whoop. It played tough for a minute.
Well, while he's getting that up, in case he doesn't, I'll tell you what. You folks probably remember the old days when they had cotton mills and they had the mill village around it, or the steel mills, and they had the village around it. The people that worked in the mills actually lived on the property, and they had to buy everything from the company store. Tennessee Ernie Ford sang a song about that. Well, Alcoa, I don't know, but somebody mentioned their name. But basically, that is what is happening in these small communities. They want to force people off of the land into the small communities, living right around the place where they work, and dealing with the stores that are also run by the community planners. So we're not going forward. We're going back in time, back to the time where people had to walk to work, and basically we're at the control of the company itself.
Called Vision 2020. It is a flavor or a type of smart growth legislation. And what that simply means is that a vision has been developed by planners for this area. They want to dictate how growth will occur or not occur in this area. And by that result, who will profit or not profit by that plan. And what this plan does, very simply, is to lay out a vision of this area that includes the evolution or creation of villages. They want to force all growth in this area into villages, high density, high population villages. Around these villages will be drawn what are called urban boundary zones. These urban boundary zones will delineate the village from the surrounding countryside. And those two entities, the village and the countryside, will be treated differently by this legislation. Property that is not in the village will find that its value is lessened, reduced, or eliminated. Property within the village will find that property will gain or rise in value, because that's the only place where development will be allowed to occur. As an example, recently we had a resident here who put in an application to build a barber shop in his little community. He happened to own some property on the side of the highway in a rural area here. He was told that he could not. That instead, if he wanted a barber shop, he had to go into the little village nearby, or little community within the village, and purchase a site there, or negotiate someone where he has a site to allow him to put up a barber shop. Now, what that did was to render his property useless. The purpose and only property is to find some way to make that property produce wealth, whether it's growing a crop or putting a small business on it, for rural people, particularly in this area, who've never had the opportunity to translate their holdings into wealth, to be told at this point that that can never happen, that they will be denied access to water and sewer, that the only place that water and sewer will be able to go will be in the villages that are designated by this plan. That's the problem. It creates a two-tiered system of people and societies here. Those who are in the village will be allowed to accumulate wealth, their property will rise in value. Those of us who are in the rural areas who are not in the village will find that the property values are dropping, that they're not allowed to do anything with the property practically that will produce any wealth. That robs these property owners of wealth. It's a takings, in my opinion, because of that.
Well, the rest of the DVD is well worth the effort to watch. And I highly recommend that if you have a black friend, share this with them. We need to broaden our perspective here and bring this to a much broader public forum. Now, Joe mentioned urban growth boundary. And this is a page from this particular document. This is also produced by the state of Minnesota. It's online. You can go out and get a copy of it. From policy to reality, model ordinances for sustainable development. And if you look at your plan, you'll see urban growth boundary or maybe utility service areas, because urban growth boundary sounds restrictive. We don't want to sound restrictive. We want to provide you with certain services. And if you move inside this boundary, you'll have those services. But if you live outside, you won't. And here now is, I can't remember, page 2, growth management. A UGB, urban growth boundary, is an established line beyond which urban services such as public sewer, water, transportation improvements will not occur. Well, now you can imagine what's going to happen to the value of land on the outside of the UGB and what's going to happen to it on the inside. Well, here are some examples. Remember I was talking about Habitat 1, which was Vancouver, Canada, back in 1976. Some of the governors attended that conference. And this photograph is now from, I think, the Portland area, or at least Washington, one or the other. I can't remember exactly which one. This house sold for $154,000, probably built in the 50s. I would think a very comfortable house. And it was purchased and then, whoops, wrong button. It was then torn down, and in its place, actually there were 6 16-foot wide houses that were built on that same lot. Now, this is what happens when an urban growth boundary is put up, because you have upset the free enterprise system dealing with private property. So here now you've got to do something with the land in order to accommodate people that are moving in, and these houses now sell for $150,000. They're entry-level homes. Okay, now if you go back and look at your plan for the word infill, we want to, here's infill now. This was City of Auburn. Infill development is development or redevelopment in established areas of the city. You could use that phrase from anywhere. It really doesn't make any difference. This might be a vacant lot or a redeveloping area for more intensive use. Oh, and this brings to mind zoning overlays, because you think of zoning as being a protection for a specific area. But we have transferable development rights. And if you remember, Mrs. Googe talked about transferable development rights. And it is a denial of the development rights on the outside of the UGB. A banker or an entity is created so that they can go out and assess the development rights on the outside of the UGB and put those credits up on the market, and a person on the inside, a developer, could buy those credits and put a zoning overlay where they would have 4 apartments before. They could put a high-rise 10-story building. This also would apply for farming, because if you want to eat bacon, you will have a zoning overlay and a pigsty next door if you're going to have bacon the next day, because you're not going to have food coming from outside your food shed. Now let me get on to infill. What is infill? Now these 2 homes obviously are modest homes, probably no more than $50,000, $60,000. But there is a large lot in between, and that was found to be infill. And a permit was issued, and now we have proper infill in this city. Now, the planners, I was in the Nashville area, and I think the planners said, we're not going to do that. We wouldn't do that. Well, here's a prime example of what has already occurred because there's been the free enterprise system has been done away with. Now this is, let's see, did I turn the, hang on, get close down to the end here, so if y'all getting tired. This, I probably think the next few slides will really bring it home that this is a religion. So if I can get the little hand up here. This is not an isolated instance. Go out to YouTube and type in the Earth Pledge. If you're taking down notes, look up Janissary. I think this is the jot and tittle of Janissary in our generation. These children will grow up and look like us, but they won't be us. They won't hold the same principles. They'll hold an entirely different worldview, and believe me, it will take away your property rights because there will be certainly more of them than there are of us. Now, this particular slide is the Ark of Hope. And this box was actually made to look like the Ark of the Covenant. It was made from one tree in Germany, shipped over to the New England area, and hand-carried to the United Nations Meditation Room, where it sat in state. And inside this box was the Earth Charter. Now here's what Gorbachev had to say about that Earth Charter. My hope is that this charter will be a kind of 10 Commandments, a sermon on the mount that provides a guide for human behavior toward the environment in the next century. So we've got our work cut out for us. Believe me, if we sit back and do nothing, this is going to happen. We have to take initiative here and do something about it. Now, I've talked a little bit about the National Environmental Policy Act. I'm getting close down to the end here. This graphics is one of the best graphics I've ever seen. I use this throughout in other presentations. It depicts the status quo April the 18th of 1775. April the 19th completely changed this graphics, both legally, judicially, and any other way, morally, that you can think of. But here's the National Environmental Policy Act that I had referred to. And I'm going to fill it in because we have a modern day version of this particular graphics. And here now is a quote from this National Environmental Policy Act. The federal government responsibility is to ensure for all Americans safe, healthful, productive, and aesthetically and culturally pleasing surroundings. This is about 2 or 3 paragraphs long. Go out and look this law up. The laws that have come down from this are the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Water Act. Some of the acts that the other side talked about earlier stem from this policy statement. Well, in my opinion, the Environmental Policy Act really needs to go right where the religious laws used to go, the Bible. Agenda 21 is a milestone for that. It should undergird the National Environmental Policy Act. And here now is the Council on Environmental Quality. Go out to the executive branch's website, the president's website, and look at the tabs on the top. And on the right-hand side, you're going to find Council on Environmental Quality. You see, NEPA established this council. They have been called the Council of God because they determine the criteria by which the executive branch and agencies will designate endangered species. So this is the council that really sits on the throne and determines the rights of frogs over Europe. Well, of course, that ought to be where the church used to be. Of course, what has the president done? Well, he should be the king in this particular graphics. And then we have the Environmental Protection Agency. Notice what it says, Office of Criminal Enforcement. special agent. So you could actually commit a crime against Mother Earth. Well, that should go right there. In Birmingham, we already have the Environmental Police Force. This is coming your way, count on it. Atlanta's got them, and so does Mobile. So then, that should go right there. Well, if you've got the Environmental Police Force, can the Political Code Enforcement Officer be very far behind? So I thought he ought to go right there. What has Congress done? Absolutely nothing. They have acquiesced in all of their responsibility, and they are just subservient to the executive branch. So that's how I feel in this particular practice. What is government? I got a couple more slides, and then we'll open it up as long as y'all want to talk about questions. I had no idea what really government was until I ran across, it didn't have a good definition, that is, until I ran across this. Properly constituted under God's law, government is the transfer of specific rights and obligations, those designated by the people, to an entity called government. Government becomes a corporation, a legal fiction, an idea that is described in a written format. The written format or document is a charter, a contract, a constitution, which contains the mission statement that spells out the purpose of government. Now, in Alabama, we have one of the finest descriptions of the purpose of government that I have ever read. This is Article 1, Section 35, and it says that the sole object and only legitimate end of government is to protect society as a whole, future generations, species equity. No, it doesn't say that at all. It says it is to protect the individual in what? In the enjoyment of life, liberty, and property. Now, Ken's already gone over this point, but it's worthwhile to go over again. John Locke was the one that actually coined that phrase. And he was, by the way, the third most quoted individual in the founding era. I have a book of sermons that talk about the magnificent John Locke. And he said that life, liberty, and property were the sole aim and purpose of government. Jefferson came along and said, well, if you don't have life, there is no other property. It is the first aspect that must be maintained, and he substituted pursuit of happiness. Now, I'm going to pose a thought to you. Just take it with you for this next week. If government will not protect the first aspect of property among the most innocent among us, do you think that they're going to protect your private property rights as an adult? So now, what happens? What happens if they don't do this? Well, gosh, they assume other functions. It is usurpation and oppression. And I contend that's where we are.
Yes, sir.
So, you want to have the lights? Any questions? We need a moderator. Who wants to be a moderator? There you go.
Well, I think it's fitting that Alabama, has this article that describes the real purpose of government, and our state motto is "We dare defend our rights." And I'm delighted that we're also the first state that passed an anti-Agenda 21 bill.
Could you step back a slide to your definition of government? Right there, properly constituted under God's government is the transfer of specific rights. Not just rights, but authority. And authority, I believe we're all treated with equal authority. I don't have the authority to tell my neighbor what he can and cannot do with his land. Therefore, if I can't tell my neighbor what he can and cannot do with his land, or he can't tell me or somebody across town what they can and cannot do with their land, if we all get together, how is it possible that we can delegate more authority than we have individually?
No, we can't delegate anything other than what God has granted to us. And it's only those specific rights that have been delegated. And we don't give up those rights when we delegate that to government.
Yes, but if you allow government to assume authority and nobody fights against it, after a while people just come to believe that they have that power. So you have to rise up against it and pound them with the U.S. Constitution and the Tennessee Constitution and make them live under the law.
Gentlemen, I'm going to give you my name. My last name is Dutch. It's Vreeland. My first name's Pandora. My husband's family lived in Morris County, New Jersey since the 1600s, Dutch farmers. The family still lives up there. My husband went to develop their family property that had been in their family for that many years and ran into the EPA, who threatened to fine him $10,000 US a day for filling in the man-made ponds his family had put on their property. That was number one. Number two, they wanted to slow down development in Morris County, New Jersey. Property was very expensive, 25 miles from New York City. Interstate Route 287 came and took 5 acres of property, separated 1 acre from the main farmland, paid him $15,000 an acre for property worth $200,000 an acre if we had developed it, number one. Number two, they had 2 Texas Eastern transmission gas lines on the property. Well, one was Texas Eastern, the other company I don't know the name of. They had enormous easements for those transmission lines, buried transmissions lines. Our town decided that to slow development down, they were going to add additional buffers and easements to either side of those transmission lines. That was going to condemn from development 4 more lots out of my husband's family's property. We fought them on that because actually one of the gentlemen was on Texas Eastern group that actually condemned property for that. And he said, we take way more than we need. You're just going after this to stop development. Okay, so we pushed them back on that. Then they decided that they needed so much property that you couldn't have impervious areas. You couldn't put asphalt down on so much of it because we needed rainwater. We were on an aquifer. They changed the zoning from one house that could be built on 1/3 acre to now only one house on 1 acre. They upzoned it. So that took 2/3 of the value out of the development out right there. I'm here to tell you, they know every trick in the book. They go from town to town, they have meetings, the people who are the land use and planning people all read out of the same playbook about how to stop you from developing your property. And this thing kept going on and on and on. Finally, they said, we had to do the upzoning because your property's on an aquifer. But when they wanted to put in the high-density housing on the same aquifer less than half a mile away, they were going to completely change the zoning to allow more impervious surfaces and high-density housing. I shut them down on that. This is such a true... I'm covered in perspiration listening to what you're saying, knowing what my husband's family had to go through to keep their property. So I thank you very much for what you're doing, and I want you to know that the fight is started, and we need to continue it.
That we have that gets into what you can do personally on an individual basis, but it's a whole nother presentation. So I don't really want to get into it, but if you want to, try to have, and I've given out some DVDs to some of the people. Hopefully they'll give them enough information to get spooled up on what they can do. But don't be disheartened. There are things that we can do, and we just need to exercise those things.
This is for us on a local level. Many questions have been asked of MPC, TPO, and other groups about Knoxville's affiliation with ICLEI. We were told that the only reason they joined ICLEI was to receive the document, the software to do the measurements and all this. I have a document here called Growing Economic Prosperity Through Environmental and Social Responsibility from the City of Knoxville website. And it says this is the City Energy and Sustainability National Participation. The City of Knoxville participates as an energy and sustainability partner nationally whenever possible. Here are some examples of activities and organizations we support and contribute to with time and resources. The second one is Local Governments for Sustainability, ICLEI. Knoxville serves on conference planning and policy advisory committees. So they are actually working with ICLEI or for ICLEI. They are not just using the software. The second thing I want to show is I have a survey that was done in June of 2012 by the American Planning Association. This says the actual survey was conducted online within the United States by Harris between March 8th through the 12th of 2012 among 1,308 U.S. residents aged 18 years or older. The respondents for the APA poll were recruited from a Harris Interactive Online panel, one of the oldest and most credible general public panels in the world. Respondents were selected to match the 2010 U.S. Census Bureau demographic estimates of the American general public in terms of age, income, race, ethnicity, and geography. In addition, low-income African American and Hispanic demographic segments were oversampled to ensure sufficient inclusion in the survey's overall raw and weighted results. So what we have is a survey of 1,308 people to represent 311 million people in America. And I'll go to the last question, which was finding 8. Do you support or oppose United Nations Agenda 21? It says 6% oppose, 9% support, and 85% don't know enough about United Nations Agenda 21 to answer.
I'm not surprised. Let me say that I haven't had a question about the no trespass sign. That's one of the things that you can do as a private property owner. You don't own real estate, you don't own personal property, you own private property. If you post this, now you'll have to do it according to Hoyle in Tennessee. I think there's, Karen Brackett told me that you have to put up 4 signs, I think on the 4 corners. You'll have to look that code up. On the back side of the handout that we have here, there is a reason why you want to have this put on public record. Because in Florida, the signs have been torn down by the code enforcement officer and it becomes your word against his that was ever there. So if you post the sign, hold up a newspaper, take a photograph of you and the newspaper and that sign, that is evidence of when that sign was put there. You notarize that, you send it to any elected official who may have charged to send a code enforcement officer or anybody else to your property, and notice him that he doesn't have the authority without written permission from you to enter. Now, I'm sure that they're going to contend that they have complete authority to do this. We have at least 4 Supreme Court rulings that they don't have the authority to do this. They have to have a warrant. So if this becomes necessary, we can provide you with the information in those specific Supreme Court cases that would bolster your position. And I'm sure that if you do send this notice in to the elected official, you may want to cite phrases from those particular cases to make sure that they know they don't have the authority to do that.
Okay, earlier you showed the slide on Greene County. You pressed the button and it turned green and everybody gasped. Monday night, we have our own Greene County being voted on in the zoning of our Knox County Commission. It dwarfs that. We have a chart here, someone has it, and I think Ken has it, we can show it to you. This vote Monday is crucial. Now, I asked Mark Donaldson a question and he danced a lot and evaded it. But 2 things are happening. The first thing that's happening is zoning. Our commissioners do have a vote on zoning. You need, and this is Commissioner Briggs, you don't need to wear him out, he's with us. Commissioner Smith is with us, Commissioner Anders is with us. I would really focus mostly on Commissioner Brown, Mike Brown of South Knoxville, Ed Schaus, who's at large, and Chairman Mike Hammond, who is at large. The bottom line is, if they vote the zoning down, then I think he's in a rock and a hard place. I don't think that the minimum subdivision regulations will work if the zoning is defeated. They need to vote them both down, but the minimum subdivision regulations is only a symbolic vote. It's non-binding. The bottom line is, we have the Briggs Amendment, and it was to protect due process by making the Hillside and Ridgetop Plan advisory. They are using a technicality to bring this back in, even though they were told it was advisory. It was voted down twice. So I guess we've told them 2.5 times no. We said you can have it if it's non-binding. They're bringing it in to make it binding Monday night. It would be good if you could be there. If you're going to speak from the podium, let me give you some messaging advice. Keep it to due process and the importance of the tax base. I would not suggest you go any farther than that, or you will turn a few of them off. We need every vote, as this is very, very close. Appreciate anything you can do in terms of calling them. It's at 6 o'clock. It is in the main assembly room of the city-county building. And you can park on the street. Really quite easy to park on the street at 6 o'clock. Not bad. There's several parking garages.
After 5 o'clock, the city-county parking lot is
Oh, it is? Oh, okay, thank you. All right, so, hey, that doesn't get any easier than that. Encourage your friends and neighbors to be there in person. And I would just tell you, less is more if you choose to go to the podium. You should be able to say it in a minute or two. My own personal advice, we all know that Hillside Ridgetop has its genesis in Agenda 21. I would recommend that you go there. I'd say go for the win. I mean, we all know. We know. I don't think that you need to take the chance. This is going to be a razor-close vote, and we really need to send a message to them. And we have our state legislature, which will take care of the problems at the state level on this 13-3-403, which is giving them all the power on the subdivision regulations. So thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate you being here. How specifically did you get, I don't want to reinvent the wheel like you guys said, how specifically did you get your ideas into legislation before a state committee of your legislators?
Well, actually, we've been working with our legislature for a good while now. The Tea Party movement in Alabama is very strong. Of course, everybody thinks all citizens groups are part of the Tea Party. Well, they're not. Don and I was around, we were around a long time before anybody thought of the Tea Party. I guess we were the Tea Party before there was one. But we have a lot of citizens who've gotten pretty active. And for the first time in 136 years, we elected a conservative, they happen to be Republican legislature. And so between the activity among the citizens groups and the newly elected officials, we had a much better situation than we had in the past. And then the way that the bill was cast, rather than going out and saying, this is an anti-Agenda 21 bill, we cast the bill as a due process under the Constitution, which anybody ought to be able to understand and be in favor of. And then it got further on into the bill. Once they understood that, it spelled out that no government entity from the state down could basically take money from or have anything to do with any group that was attached to Agenda 21. But I'll have to tell you, it was providential. As much as anything else, nobody was any more surprised than we were when we got it passed. We worked really hard for a long time, but that thing went through the House committee unanimously with no change. Now, if you've ever been in the legislature, they say there's two things you never want to see made is legislation and sausage. You never see a bill go through unchanged.
Who wrote it?
Henry Lamb helped us with the words. Don and I, we wrote it up originally. We sent it to Henry, and it said, Henry, can we say this better? And Henry was as good as there ever was. And so Henry helped us with the casting of it under the due process, which it is. I mean, there's nothing deceptive about it. It's about due process under the law. But it's putting it in such a way that it's palatable. But anyway, it came out of the House committee unanimously. It came out of the Senate committee unanimously. It passed out of both houses, the bodies, unanimously. It went to the governor. The governor handed it to his legal staff, and they said, whoa, we're talking about lots of federal money here. So they sat there and they scratched their heads for 6 days while we encouraged them to the tune of about 200 phone calls a day to the governor. And finally one day they said, okay guys, we're going to sign the bill, would you please give us our phones back? And so that's kind of how it came down. It was just all the stars were aligned perfectly. You know, we did everything just right, and as long as things were moving in the right direction, I didn't muddy the waters, you know, and sometimes getting too active can hurt you. But all I can tell you, we were extremely lucky. We had God on our side, and everything just lined up.
about this. Are we going to get together and do something like this and try to write a law? But let's do that, Richard, okay?
I have a lower level sort of question, rather legislature. In Sevier County, where they are basically going to, I guess probably the whole county is going to become Great Smoky Mountains National Park, essentially. Gatlinburg, that region. We have the beginnings of this. Our Smokies, our future. The visioning thing is going on right now. I wonder, have either of you ever experienced somebody getting together a competing vision and holding competing meetings so that the commies go forward with one vision and the people go forward with another vision? It's all public, it's in the papers, it's on the radio stations, and that way it seems to me there would be more exposure to the truth. Do you know of anybody ever trying that?
Well, yes, as a matter of fact, but I suppose you folks understand what this entire process is. There's a new thing in this country over the last 5 or 6 years called the Bleecker method. And probably if you look into this, they use the Bleecker method to get this visioning done and get their legislation in place. But Dr. Bleecker himself, he sounds German, probably a descendant from Hitler for all I know. But anyway, his stated goal on his own website, if you go on YouTube or you go on the internet, but go on YouTube and just type in the Bleecker method, and there's some videos there of him giving presentations. And he says in his presentation that the objective of their method is to get citizens to grudgingly consent to programs that they are actually opposed to. These people don't care what you want. All they're trying to do through this method is to damp down your dissent so that they can get it passed over you. By the time you hear about a public hearing, it's all over. They've already sent out the emails to all the government people, to all the environmental people, to everybody involved. They've all gotten together. Now, they may let a citizen wander through every now and then, but I guarantee they make sure you don't have any input. By the time you hear about it, it's all done. It's in concrete. But NEPA requires that they have public input. And they have to check off that little box that said that they had public input. So when you get to that stage, what you've got is what we had today. These two gentlemen don't really care, about the creation of it. All they were doing is trying to sell you the program that they already created. If you think you're going to have an input in what this program looks like, you're wrong. So I agree with you. If you set up opposition early enough, if you know the first time they talk about creating a vision and your people rise up and you start combating it, then you got a chance to fight it. But if you try to work within their system, you don't have a chance. I mean, that facilitator, and they always have what I call a stumble bum. Some nice guy, that, I'm just a nice fella, you don't have to worry about me. Well, he's running the room, but the person who's running the meeting is the dragon lady. Seems like it's always some woman 28 to 35 years old. She's sitting over in a corner, and she's the one taking the notes about what was said. And then you get in your little groups and you write down your suggestions on a card. You don't get to tell everybody about your suggestion. You just get to hand it in and they get to tabulate it. And of course the dragon lady's recording what she wants to hear. I went to a meeting over at Gunnersville, Alabama, and I just decided to just mess with them. So I got up and I started talking. And all of a sudden, you ask a very complicated question that Stumblebum doesn't know the answer to, and then you watch his eyes. And whoever he looks at, that's who's running the meeting. So anyway, I figured out.
Were you at our meetings?
I figured out who Dragon Lady was.
PlanET meetings?
And I got up and I started talking, and all of a sudden I just looked at her and I said, "Why did you stop writing?" And she looked startled, first of all, that I was addressing her, that I knew who she was. And she said, "Well, what do you mean?" And I said, "Well, I noticed that when you hear what you want to hear, the pen moves. But when you hear what you don't want to hear, the pen stopped. And I just wondered, did I offend you somehow? Why did you stop writing?" And then you got them going. Don, you want to say?
Yeah, let me kick in on the facilitated meeting and then get back to the question that you asked. In the past, as a matter of fact, Ken makes the point sometimes that I know their language, so I'll go in and befriend these people in a public meeting, and somebody else will sit at some other point in the room. And as a matter of fact, one of these meetings that I went to, the guy went on and on and on, and I was asking questions, just oozing honey and butter all over this guy. And so he got down to a point, and I said, now, you have urban growth boundaries. Is it true that where those have been put in place, the property value on the outside goes through the floor because you can't sell it, on the inside it goes through the roof because there's a shortage of property? And he said, well, that doesn't happen right away. and just like y'all did, I mean, the whole room just broke out in laughter. Well, now, you got to understand, protect the guy that's doing that, because it was a guy that knew me. I worked with him for a number of years in the steel mill, and I hadn't seen him in I don't know how many years, and he told me later on, he said, I almost got up and punched you in the nose. So be aware. And by the way, this particular facilitator still thought that I was his friend, and after the meeting, he came over and shook my hand, made a beeline to me. So the point here is that disrupting the meeting really, in my viewpoint, amounts to much of nothing, because these are paid to be there. It's going to happen. Your only advantage in going is to try to get people that may be on the fence to look at this as a property rights issue. And then if you can identify those people, they may become ardent supporters, because after all, they're activists in their own right. You just need to get them to understand what they really need to become an activist for. Now, there was another instance where several of us went to a meeting dealing with whether it was a rewrite of the Alabama Constitution. It was in a church, and they had a large church. It had a foyer in the front. My wife went out. Ken and I produced some brochures. We call them the red and blue, and we put those out. And typically, the politician or whoever it will is making the presentation will take questions, and if he doesn't like the question, he'll talk for a very long time. By the time you get lost in the answer, he's off to another question. So in this particular meeting, there were several of us that sat in different parts of the area of the church, and so one of us would stand up and say, well, I don't think you quite answered that question. Could we go back to that question and let's hear a better explanation of it? So we were able to do that to this particular individual, and then of course, anybody that gets these brochures, no matter where they go, they stick the brochure in their lapel pocket or they put it in the purse. And in this particular instance, the guy had folded his up, and he pulled out the brochure and he says, I think that question that guy asked over there is number 2 on this brochure that I had folded in my lapel pocket. Well, you know what everybody else is doing? They're getting the brochure out because they're wanting to look and see what number it was. And they want to follow along. And so we were able to bring him back to the issue and get him to start answering those questions. And to me, that's a much more productive thing than going and openly disrupting the meeting. And I understand that people want to do that, and I appreciate that, but I just think it's not very productive. It certainly doesn't put a good face on our position.
Well, I totally agree. You get a lot more out of it if you don't attack them. In fact, you never want to be seen as the attacker or the adversary. And I have to tell you, the meeting that I did that deal with the Dragon Lady, I'd already surveyed the room, and there was nobody in there who I had any chance of swaying to my side. There were more government people, and I had nothing to lose, and I was tired, so I played with it. But,
you didn't tell them about putting the sticker on the wall.
Oh, yeah. Well,
You got to do that.
they came in, and they were going from county to county, and they brought in their posters, and they were these are the different plans that other counties have decided upon. And of course, they were all the same plan, just with a little different angle on them. And then they passed out stickers, and you're supposed to take these 10 stickers and you're proportion them according to which one of those plans you like best, see? So you went around, if you like this one best, you give it 3 stickers. If you like that one, you give it 2 or whatever. So I walk over and I just start sticking them on the wall. And the facilitator runs over and says, oh, no, he thought he had a real dumb buddy here. He said, you know, you're supposed to put them on the posters. And I said, well, I don't like any of those posters. I prefer this blank wall to anything that you presented. I'm still this is the same bunch. I'm still messing with it. And I said, I just guess I'm dumb. I don't understand. Now, you had the same length meeting in other counties that you have with us. Now, all we've had time to do is to go over this stuff that other people you say has presented. We haven't had a chance to really discuss it, to come up with anything. And yet we're supposed to believe that these people are so brilliant that in the same time period they came up with these marvelous plans. Said, could it possibly be that you came up with the plans and did the same thing with them that you did with us? Time to do was stick stickers on it, or maybe if they're really dumb, stick stickers on the wall. And so I'll just have a grand time messing with them. But that's not what you should normally do. You need to go in there and you try to educate people like we did today. Believe me, we could have torn these guys to shred. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to educate people and you're trying to move them to your side. You're not debating them. You're playing to the audience to make them understand.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, okay, we got the engineer consent meeting over here. That's separate. I'm talking about, let's have another one that has nothing to do with them, and let's get real citizen input on what we want for our future. That's where I am.
Let me get to my answer for that question. We are a republic, not a democracy, and I don't care how many surveys they come up with, what they do, and how many, if they have the entire county to come out for a visioning session, it makes no difference. The purpose of government is right there to protect the citizen in the enjoyment of life, liberty, and property. And if they sit in a meeting and come up with a consensus to take my private property rights, I'm sorry, that won't wash. What I really think ought to happen is that we begin to do letters notarized to these people that are in office, asking them by what authority they are using our taxpayer money to hold surveys when in fact their charter says that they're to protect our rights and not violate those rights. And then if you go and get their charter of the city and get their oath of office and other documents, and then start looking at the ordinances they're writing up and do a comparison of what they have agreed to in their oath in comparison to what ordinances they've done, and then asking about what authority you're doing this, then if we have sufficient numbers of people that start doing this, then we can maybe have some effect on these people.
So you have to wait till it gets to the county officials.
Well, they're using our resources to hold these meetings. That's the very first thing. By what right are you doing this? Then you're going to formulate ordinances based off of a policy like NEPA. And by the way, there is something in law, and maybe some people here know more than I do, that says that if the dog's lying, don't upset him. So if NEPA has been on the books and there has not been a contested situation on NEPA, it's that dog lying. Adverse possession of property is very simple. If nobody objects to the adverse possession of property rights, then after 20 years in Alabama, it can't be contested. So if you allow these comprehensive plans, which clearly violate our unalienable rights, to go uncontested on the books and then implement ordinances dealing with this to further put teeth in that, then we're letting that dog lie. We don't need to do that. We don't need to go to a public meeting. We need to have a written documentation of what they've done and start to use that against them.
Well, and you have to realize too that this is a 50-year plan, Agenda21 Sustainable Development. These guys, they knew 25 years ago what they needed today. And passed, like in Alabama, it's what I call landmine legislation. You'll see a piece of legislation come down the pipe, and you look at that thing, and it just doesn't make any sense at all. And you go talk to a representative who sponsored it and said, why did you put this out there? I mean, it says that we're not going to allow people to plant trees in the median in a city. And he said, well, I don't know. You know, 2 or 3 times I asked him, and finally he said, well, the feds want it. And in order to get grant money, he had to give the feds what they wanted. But what happens is these people know what the long-range goal is. They've worked hard for a long time to get the legislation that they needed in place, and it sits there. They don't enforce it initially. They let it sit there and wait for its time. And then when its time comes, they start enforcing it. When the people rise up and start raising Cain, they say, well, what are you fussing about? It's been on the books for 15 years. See? So you got to have somebody look through the laws, look through the legislation, and first find out what's already there. And then find out what they're trying to move to implement, and then start working against it. But most of the public officials, these guys, you know, they don't run for office because they're bad guys. They really intend to do the right thing, most of them, and they just don't know. They don't know. 85% of this country doesn't know what Agenda 21 is. And I say there's probably 85% of the politicians don't know what it is either. So you got to educate them. That's the most important thing you can do, is educate everybody, but also your politicians. And we've had people that, you know, swore that there was no such thing as Agenda 21, and then one day they open their eyes and they come up and they say, Ken, you know that crazy stuff you've been telling us about all these years, it's really happening, isn't it? And they, yeah, it is. And then all of a sudden they're on our side. They're helping us. Believe me, we couldn't have got our law passed without a lot of help. So it takes time. And you can't get disappointed and back off. You just have to keep plugging away. And you know, we got the reputation of being bulldog people down here. You know, we just keep on chewing until we got it done.
Two things. We were supposed to have 3 sets of forms for PlanET. We think that we disrupted them enough through the second set of forums that they've decided not to have a third set of forums, or they're going to call them open houses where you just drop in and drop out, or it's going to be by invite only, just like they did the Oak Ridge that we were talking about. So the second thing is Mark and Jeff are both planners. They both told you that. Many times we heard that said. The APA, this is Planning for Smart Growth 2000, and this was a 2002 document. It says, following passage of its landmark 1998 growth policy law, Tennessee has spent the last 2 years focusing on implementation of the new law, which significantly updates the state's comprehensive planning statutes. The law, which was enacted with the help of the Tennessee chapter of the American Planning Association, incorporated language from APA's Growing Smart legislative guidebooks.
Last question.
I really want to make a comment. As this gentleman stated, one of the forums was by elected officials being there, or people that worked for the county, and yet they use those figures in their status, you know, as far as who wants what in the region. During the break, I spoke to Mary Cook with Smoky Mountain Tea Party, and we were talking about one of the forums that was held. They came and took the kids out of school and did a forum with them. And Mary went up and asked these two gentlemen why they did that. And they said, well, we got a lot of good information from them. Well, these are kids that probably don't pay taxes and don't own property, so they have no idea what it means to people who are private property owners. And this is the type of information that we're getting, stating that people are for this regional mess that they're making for us. But, you know, we have to really start questioning them about where they're getting this information, because it's not from the normal taxpayer.
Well, if you notice that thing where they were blowing people up and the pledge to the earth, they're working on our children. I mean, the public school system is just, it's just marinated in this stuff. And after we're gone, you know, unless we do something right now, the generations that follow us don't know what caused America to be founded, or what kind of life we led, or why we were even free. So we've got to educate people. These folks, these kids are being taught that there is no God but government, and that they're a citizen of the earth. They're not a citizen of Tennessee or the United States, they're a citizen of the earth. And all good things come not from God but from government.
George has a question. Ma'am, I'll get to yours in just a minute. Go ahead, George.
Well, that's the thing. We're pressed on time, so if George wants to make a statement or question, please do.
Thank you. I just have one question. Who do you think is funding all of this program that's going on with Agenda 21? Just a question, wait till I get through, okay? Who do you think is funding all of this Agenda 21 since the United States corporation is in bankruptcy and we're using fiat money from a Federal Reserve System and there is no value to that? I have several court cases to prove that. So they have put up all of our land as collateral for that, which we have no control over.
And us.
And it was all reported before Congress. And all they're offering us is contracts. How many of us are going to stand up and say, no more contracts?
Right.
No more contracts.
Thank you, sir.
Well, the truth of the matter is we're paying for it through either our taxation or when they print money. All it does, the more money that's in circulation and the less value the money that's out there has. Right now, an American dollar is worth what 7 cents was worth in 1933. And so when, like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and all that stuff, when they made all these loans to people that couldn't pay them back and they didn't have assets behind it, the huge adjustment we had in the stock market was because they had to backtrack. They had no basis for the money that they put out there. So the question is, I mean, the answer is it's our money. God help us if people in this country ever begin to realize what a dollar is really worth. It's only worth what you think it is. And so economically and financially, we're in great peril.
Okay, Ken and Dawn, if you want to wrap up, I've got a little statement to make and then we'll be done.
You want to wrap up? Finish it off, Ken, or you want me to? Well, let me say that as a people, we need to understand who we are. I've talked to several people about that and then begin to use that to alleviate the problems that we're suffering. Whether or not we're able to overcome the situation we're in is not the question. As John Adams was asked about slavery during the war, before the war between the states, there was a rule in the Senate floor that you could not utter the word slavery. And so he had beat his head against that wall numerous times that day. And the guy asked him, well, why do you keep doing this? You know that you're not going to change anything. He says, duty is mine. Results belong to God. So, you know, we have a responsibility. At some point, we're going to stand before that throne, and we're going to answer for what we did or didn't do.
Yes, sir.
And that's how I want to wrap it up and leave it with you. Thank you.
Well, no Montana cowboy that the world is run by those who bother to show up. The fact that you guys bothered to show up and have been very enthusiastic, and very few of you have left, and I know some people had to go, gives me great hope that we're going to get things turned around here. I mean, believe me, we've seen things, situations that looked almost impossible, and seen them completely reversed when people really understood what was going on and they stood up for their rights. Because, you know, no more than 7% of the population ever takes part in the political process. 7% of Russia was in the Communist Party. 7% of China was in the Communist Party. Guess how many people are actively involved in the United States in one party or another? About 7%. So a small number of people, if they're the activists, can make a huge difference in how things go. You guys bother to show up. If you keep bothering to show up and you keep educating yourself and you keep moving forward, you can whip this thing. I guarantee you. I wouldn't have driven up here if I thought it was a wasted trip.
All right.
So thank you for coming, and I really appreciate it.
Go ahead, clap. Just real quick, I got just a few things to let you know. I mentioned some groups in here, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention East Tennessee Research Institute or Knoxville Patriots. Within that group, you'll find people who don't pay income taxes. And you think, what? Don't pay income taxes? Well, it's voluntary. It states it in their own language. And if you look up America Freedom to Fascism, it's free on Google. You can watch it. It's about an hour and a half long. It's a documentary about the income tax and whether or not there's a law. And in the back of the room is a gentleman named Steve Norris. He's part of We Are Change, that organization. He's doing the video, but that organization basically changed the view of journalism, where people are actually citizen journalists. So, again, we've got the land use maps over here. I invite you to come look at them so that you can see. You might be surprised your land might be on it. Over there, as well as the email sign up. And if anyone wants to email me, it's richard@tnliberty.org. Richard@tn, the letters tnliberty.org. And someone mentioned the same legislation in Alabama that banned Agenda 21 being brought to Tennessee. We already have sponsorship, claimed sponsorship in the Senate. And I know there's some representatives here that, your wild loose cannon out there, Stacy Campfield, he's ready to go. And just anybody in the house needs to pick it up. So anyway, with that, thank you everybody, and stop Agenda 21.